Jojolion is a long manga, having over 100 chapters and over 5,000 pages in total. Yeah, you heard that right. You thought One Piece was long. Try looking at the average JoJo fan after finally finishing this part. But don't worry guys, because you got me here, your resident JoJo tuber who just put himself through the torture of binging the manga again. So that you don't have to go through all of that. Instead, you can just watch this video and get it fully narrated and animated. But let's get right into the series. We start this part in, well, a pretty bizarre way. JoJo waifu YASUHO Hirose is hiding from a creepy guy when, well, another guy literally emerges from the ground with no clothes on. But let's just say Strange doesn't even begin to explain him, because aside from him having no clothes except a sailor hat, he also has a bite mark on his shoulder around a star tattoo. And also, well, I don't know how else to say this, but he has 4 balls. Yes, you heard me right. 1 shaft, 4 balls. Let's move on. He also doesn't remember anything. His name, how he got here, why he hasn't subscribed to the YouTube channel while talking already. We're in chapter 1 and we're already faced with the infamous amnesia plotline. Yasuho pulls him out the ground and calls the cops to get an ambulance here when a guy named Joshu Higashikata, who Loki has top 10 worst JoJo haircuts of all time, comes running up seeing her with the naked guy and pushes her away and tries to beat the mysterious man with a rock. When that guy stands up buck naked as he tries to stop him, and you see a bubble float off his back, causing Joshu to go blind temporarily, giving the mystery man a chance to subdue him. And also, as he stands up is when Yasuho sees his 4 balls in 1 shaft and is I wouldn't say amazed, but she just can't look away. We also learn the plot of this series because, like most JoJos who have missions, this story is one that is a story about breaking a curse. But before we can break that curse, we have to find out who this guy even is. After they leave the hospital, which by the way, as this guy and Yasuho walk out, Joshu also sees this happening, and let's just say that Joshu's basically living an NTR manga. But leaving the hospital, they decide to follow the one thing they have to possibly find out who this guy is: his hat, which they trace back to the shop it was bought from, in which they go to the shop and the store owner is like, "This hat? Yeah, I remember this. I sold this to his guy and what's his name? It was oh yeah, it's Yoshikage Kira." Boom. Case solved. We found out who he is. He had just some amnesia and we found out his name, and so, well, that's the end of the story, right? Well, not so quick. This is a JoJo series. Nothing is ever that simple. Following this lead, they head to Kira's apartment, and let's just say that Strange also doesn't explain this place because he actually just only wears sailor outfits and he only eats peas, which, wait, he's actually kind of like Popeye. I just realized that when rereading this. Oh yeah, they go to this bathroom and there's just a naked girl taking a bath. And of course, he genuinely has no idea who she is. She gets up from the bath and starts begging them for help, knocking over a jar filled with nails as they see a medicine cabinet filled with all different nail clippings with all having dates on them. And also, Yasuho picks up a photo album and flips through it and all of a sudden starts shrieking and calling him a disgusting human being that needs to get out of her city and throws the book at him, rushing out. Kira goes to pick it up and, well, how do I say this to keep my channel and not get demonetized? Let's just say pictures of women who really like ropes and handcuffs. And not only that, but Kira is clearly in the background of these pictures, so he's just kind of freaky. Kira starts asking the girl who she is and what's even going on when a bunch of strange symbols appear all over them as they are now under attack from an enemy stand. The girl points upwards, telling Kira that this is actually from the upstairs neighbor that's causing this attack on them. This being the stand of Ojiro named Fun, which is actually a somewhat complicated stand in that it has no physical ability whatsoever, but he is basically able to control a target's movements through their wounds. So basically, Ojiro has to first be physically above the target, such as like being in the unit above them in an apartment, and if the target gets any wounds, such as like a small cut, it will form a symbol on that injured limb, which will now be under his control. And if he can get a mark on every limb somebody has, he gets complete control of them. Kira realizes that he just has to get where this guy upstairs won't be directly above him, and this is where we see him deploy his stand, when we see the stand for its first time, with that being of soft and wet, who has the power of bubbles. That's about it. Okay, actually it's soap bubbles, but when they touch something and it pops, he can take something from it. And although that kind of sounds like a mid power, It's absolutely broken because he can basically take anything, such as literally taking the sound from this room from just one bubble. And since the person upstairs can't hear them now, it allows them to move around more freely. They rush to the living room where the phone rings, where the woman tells Kira that this is a trap, as if they answer it, the man upstairs will know exactly where they're standing since they pick up the phone. When she then picks up the phone and tells whoever's on the other line if they just spare her life, she will just basically snitch and point out exactly where Kira is so they can kill him instead. And she does just that, and this leads now to the point where Kira is completely pinned down by the enemy stand power when suddenly, in the nick of time, Yasuho comes back in, being so starstruck by Kira that she just couldn't believe that he was a freak, and Yasuho helps Kira by just slightly freeing his shoulder just to give him enough mobility to where he's able to release a bubble that goes up to the ceiling and it steals all the friction from the upstairs. This basically causes the upstairs stand user to just slip and slide all over the place, as Kira also slides himself towards the balcony. And as a stand user upstairs is on their balcony, Kira releases another bubble, stealing his eyesight, causing him to get confused and fall over the edge. This lines it up perfectly for Kira to then hit him with an aura attack and also grab him and throw him into the apartment. He starts interrogating this guy, asking him who he is and why he's attacking them. And also, I just have to point this out because this scene was funny. As he's asking this guy who he is, Kira tells Yasuho, hey, just look over there real quick. And he just starts beating the crap out of this guy, which is a pretty gentleman thing for him to do in that moment. But as he's beating up this guy looks at him, specifically looking at Kira's hands, and upon seeing them realizes that this isn't Yoshikage Kira. He's positive that this isn't Kira. And he even has proof because Kira had sculptures of his own hands in his apartment, since if you couldn't tell, he has somewhat of a hand fetish. I mean, he even had all of his fingernail clippings just stored in his bathroom. But upon telling Kira this, they put up the hands against each other, and sure enough, they are not a match. So yeah, if you thought it was just as simple as us figuring out that this is Yoshikage Kira, well, we got quite a bit of this manga to go, and it's gonna get pretty bizarre. And as we end this stand fight, one thing I want to point out to you guys as we continue on with this manga is you're gonna see almost every stand in part 8 is usually going to be some sort of long range or autonomous stand. There's very few fights in part 8 that actually have people just punching each other. So this isn't any star platinum in the world type of part of JoJo's. This is going to be more like watching a chess match of a stand fight. Also, as we continue on, as we get confirmation that this is not Kira, technically, I'm going to start referring to him from now on out as Josuke, just because it's going to get really confusing if I go back and forth. So he is now Josuke. The neighbor, whose name is Ojiro, pulls out a paper to show that he even has a picture of Yoshikage Kira, and he explains that he literally hated Kira so much that he specifically rented the room above him, kidnapped the girl as bait, set up all these traps around the apartment, and even made a book with all of those pictures that we saw as before, as a way to lure Kira back to kill him, which, not gonna lie, this is like some elite tier type of hating this guy is doing. But he further explains that the man in this photo is the actual Yoshikage Kira, and that he was also a ship doctor. Keep that in mind, that'll be important much later in this series. But before leaving the apartment, Josuke tells Yasuho to look away just one more time, just so he can kick the guy into the table before leaving. A true gentleman. But having this picture on hand, Josuke and Yasuho decide to find the start of all of this, realizing that this picture of Kira was taken at the wall eyes where Josuke emerged from the ground, so they decide to return back there to go and investigate. Arriving at the wall eyes, Josuke uses his soft and wet to open up a hole in the ground where they discover a body. They then call the cops to this area and wait for the autopsy results, and when they come back, they see that this is actually the body of Yoshikage Kira, who died of a heart attack about 3 days ago. And it just so happens that where this body was found was the exact same spot where Josuke emerged from the ground in the beginning. And not only that, but in the autopsy results, it was found that Kira was uncovered with, well, he was missing his balls. In other words, he had the rod, but not the balls. So yeah, they were gone. So I know what you're thinking. Kira was missing balls, Josuke has an extra set of balls, so that means Josuke must be Kira. Well, not really, but, well, just keep watching, we're gonna get a lot of reveal into who he is. Afterwards, we see that since Josuke had nowhere to go, Yasuho takes him to the Higashikata household to give him security, which is actually the family of her friend Joshu from before. And he's here just temporarily until he figures out who he is, and this is when he adopts the name of Josuke Higashikata, because the dad of the household said that he looked like the dog that Yasuho used to have. And just like that, he's accepted now into this super rich family. I mean, look at their house. He's basically now living the Fresh Prince of Morio Town. Also, by the way, this house is the best map to play in JoJo Eyes of Heaven. Goated game, by the way. But while we're here, let's meet the Higashikata household. Starting with the father and the leader of the household, we have NORIUSKE Higashikata, who is also the owner of the Higashikata Fruit Company, which is the reason that they're so rich. And he's also the descendant of NORIUSKE Higashikata I, who you may remember from Steel Ball Run. And I'm not going to spoil anything about Steel Ball Run because I care about you guys, but let's just say he won at least a little bit of money for this race, and then that helped the family start their fruit company, which is why they're so rich today. Next up, we have JOBIN Higashikata, the eldest son, and he looks like his favorite band is My Chemical Romance, but he's gonna be very important. We also have HATO Higashikata, my oh my, the eldest daughter, who is also a model. Pretty good stepsis for Josuke. Now, everyone in this household isn't a model because we also have someone that you've already met, and that's Joshu, who actually at this point, I'm just gonna say it, he has the worst haircut in all of JoJo's. Like, how is your sister a model and then she lets you walk out the house with this on your head? We then have the youngest daughter, Daya, who actually has a crush on Josuke, and she also has really bad eyesight. In this household, we also have Mitsuba, who is the wife of Jobin, and they have a child together named TSURUGI, who is a boy, but he is raised to wear girls' clothes. And this is apparently due to some like family curse they have, and this is a tradition that all males in the household have to wear girls' clothes until they're the age of 12. We'll get into that later as well. So yeah, this household is complicated and kind of weird to say the least, but hey, they're at least rich, but you don't have to worry about remembering all of them right now. As we get through the series, you'll be introduced to them again. Oh yeah, we also have a maid named Nijimura, who honestly just kind of looks like gender bent Jotaro. But as Josuke goes into the house, not only did he take Joshu's girl before, but he also takes Joshu's room as well, making Joshu now have to live in a room above the garage, which you may feel bad for him for this, but also I have to reiterate, look at his terrible haircut. He kind of deserves this. Josuke, however, doesn't just get to stay in this house for completely free. He has 3 rules that he has to listen to. Number 1 is, of course, listen to NORIUSKE. Number 2, his job is to look after the youngest daughter, Daya, with her running over and she gives him a really big hug. And then also there's one more important rule, and that's that Josuke is never to go to the room at the top of the stairs. But now with Josuke formally introduced and now living in this household, he starts his new job of watching over Daya. Except that it's not as easy as it sounds, since she has such poor eyesight, where honestly, I'll kind of speed run through this mini arc as it's not the most important, but while taking care of her, we learned that when she was about 3 years old, she fell into one of the wall-eye faults, which is that place that Josuke was found outside, and that's when her vision began to get worse. But as that happened, she also gained a stand, which is named California King Bed, which I actually had to look, but that is a song name and it's actually from Rihanna. But her stand power is that she can steal memories from people under certain conditions, which is fairly harmless and playful, but with someone like Josuke who has amnesia, she can basically brainwash him since he already has so few memories, so stealing the few memories he has left can really mess with him. Also during this, we see a scene that Yasuho ordered a DNA test on both Kira and Josuke, but the results came back that not only it was a match, but that it's actually the same person within at least a 95.8% accuracy. But also as Josuke is going through the house, we see a symbol on the handrail of the stairs that Josuke was told not to go up, but he recognizes this symbol because it was also in the picture of Kira's body when it was found in the wall eyes. But as Daya basically continues to gaslight Josuke by stealing more of his memories, they just so happen to end up in bed with Josuke getting on top of her, taking off her belt, at that same time that NORIUSKE is walking by, seeing this man that he just let into his house now on top of his 16-year-old daughter he had him take care of. But interestingly enough, he doesn't stop them at that moment. He just gets really angry and swears that he's gonna kill Josuke and capture him. But for now, he just wants to make Josuke a slave in both mind and body. So is NORIUSKE good or bad? Well, let's just keep reading. Josuke and Daya continue as she continues to undress, and I mean, she's 16 years old. Of course I was gonna blur these panels. It's chapter 9 if you care anyways, but as she keeps pressuring him to make the first move, Josuke just goes all the way, saying that he straight up is in love with her. But it was actually a distraction so he can use his soft and wet to burst a bubble, causing her to get startled, and then that basically ends that, and she now leaves the room so that she can go shopping. And as she gets dressed, she starts to think to herself that she really is actually in love with Josuke, and she wants to just do a lot of things to him, as Josuke is looking at her just thinking, I gotta defeat her somehow and just get my memories back. We skip forward a bit and Josuke learns that her power works if she steps on somebody's shadow. So after closing a fridge door that was emitting light and casting his shadow, he finally gets his memories back. And if you thought it would be a while before we saw what was upstairs, Josuke is basically speed running, breaking all the rules of this house, because the first thing he does after this is walk upstairs with Daya into the room he was told not to go to. So yeah, we have Josuke, who was just taken in by a super rich family that was nice enough to take in a random guy with no memories, and in one day he almost sleeps with their 16-year-old daughter and breaks the one rule he was told not to do. Honestly, he has a lot of balls for doing that. Well, actually 4 of them. Josuke and Daya go into the room looking for the same mark he saw on the handrail, where he finds a book, and you won't believe what the matching book is. It's a book of the Steel Ball Run Race complete records, written by their ancestor NORIUSKE Higashikata I. And as he starts flipping through the book, he sees several things about the Steel Ball Run race, but one of the most important things he sees is a family tree. We see that NORIUSKE had a daughter who married an American named Johnny JOESTAR, which, yes, you heard me right, the Johnny JOESTAR, as in Johnny from part 7. Oh yeah, not only that, but Kira is a descendant of the JOESTAR bloodline. So what this family tree shows is that there's a link, although very distant, between the Higashikata family and the Kira family, and that for some reason Kira was investigating into the Higashikata family before he died. Josuke and Daya leave the room for now, but now Josuke has a connection to follow, as both Kira and his father Yoshiteru are dead, but there's still a possibility that Kira's mother, which is named Holly Joestar Kira, might still be alive, as she's only about 52 years old, now giving us a possible lead for Josuke to figure out more about Kira and also figure out more about who he is. The next day, as everyone in the household goes off to school, Josuke, since he isn't enrolled in any school, sneaks out of the house and he calls Yasuho, telling her about everything that just happened and lets her know that they need to find this Holly Joestar Kira. In which Yasuho does some detective work and she's able to find out that she was actually a former doctor. So Yasuho calls the hospital asking to speak to her, but they say that unless she's a relative, they cannot speak to patients of the hospital, which confirms that Holly is at the hospital, but this time she's actually a patient. I'll speedrun this part as well since it's not the most important, but as Josuke navigates using his GPS to meet up with Yasuho, he becomes under attack from Nijimura stand, which is actually an autonomous stand named Born This Way, that attacks by gusts of wind when you open something, such as opening up your cell phone or like a door or something like that. And it continues to follow Josuke, throwing him off course, not allowing him to find his way to the hospital. But also, as he's being attacked by the stand, he also realizes that he has an ally helping him, as his GPS on his phone continues to keep directing him away from danger and towards safety. So as he's trying to get away from Born This Way, we see the GPS navigating him back to safety. And as we continue to see the stand helping, we get a flashback to see that Yasuho also had a bite mark from when she visited the Wall Eyes, which, yes, if you haven't guessed it by now, if you have a bite mark, that basically is part 8's way of showing that you're going to be gaining a stand power, with Yasuho having gained a stand of Paisley Park. Which honestly, this stand ability is just kind of all over the place, in that its primary ability involves assisting individuals significant to Yasuho in like finding and reaching destinations more quickly, or also escaping dangerous situations. But it can also just do a lot more things that we're going to get into throughout this part. As Josuke is under attack by the enemy stand user, Yasuho visits the hospital and finds Holly, and she's reading a, well, let's just say a not safe for YouTube magazine, which, man, What is it with this part and just being so freaky? What was Araki on when he was writing this? Before Yasuho has a chance to ask Holly about Kira, a nurse comes in and asks Yasuho who she is, and when she can't answer, she kicks her out the room. But interestingly, as she leaves, we see Holly say that she can see Yasuho's stand, and if she realizes how to use it, she can use it to investigate the Higashikata family tree. And not only that, but she can use this power to help out her son of Kira, and that is going to be Yasuho's fate. Josuke finally makes it to the hospital at this point, but as he approaches, he sees Nijimura, the Higashikata family maid, realizing that she is the stand user of Born This Way that was attacking him. And after hitting her with an aura attack, he starts to question her, asking her if NORIUSKE is the one that set her up to do this. When Nijimura says that if he goes anywhere near Holly JOESTAR, she's gonna kill him, and that she will do anything to kill anybody who gets closest to her. When Josuke notices that she also has a star mark on her shoulder, just like he does. She continues to threaten him again, saying that she'll kill him if he goes to Holly, with Josuke actually giving in and complying, saying that, alright, I won't go to the hospital, and that he doesn't want to cause any harm to her, so he'll just go home and find another way to reach her. But as he leaves, Nijimura asks him to stick out his tongue, where she takes a closer look and she sees that he has a connecting seam and a blend of multiple organs, in that he has 4 eyeballs and 2 tongues. And she questions Josuke, asking him if he really did lose all of his memories and if he really doesn't recognize her, because she's actually Holly JOESTAR's daughter, which means that she is Yoshikage Kira's sister. And she explains that in order to protect Holly, she infiltrated the Higashikata household posing as a maid. That way she can also investigate the link between the Kira family and the Higashikata family. Nijimura takes Josuke back to the Wall Eyes, where we learn a very important thing, where she takes an orange and a lemon and she buries them into the ground, and then when she takes them out of the ground, she cuts them both open, with the orange and the lemon now having both orange and lemon parts inside of them, effectively mixing and combining them together, with Nijimura then confirming what you're already thinking. Josuke is actually Yoshikage Kira, but that's only a part of him. He's a fusion of both Yoshikage Kira and his own body, and that even his stand is a fusion, as Kira also had a stand that used bubbles that would explode, but when Josuke fused, the stand somehow changed. So this now brings the question of, who is the other half that Kira fused with in the Wall Eyes? Who is the other half of Josuke? Well, Nijimura tells him that the Higashikata household knows something more about who he might be, so that's what they must now uncover. Returning back to the Higashikata household, Josuke now has a mission to infiltrate the household further and uncover who his missing half is. And he has a feeling that NORIUSKE just might be the key to finding this out. But first, he wants to learn more about himself, to maybe learn more things about what he might have liked. So he asks NORIUSKE for permission to start going to school and also get his own cell phone, with NORIUSKE agreeing and telling him that Joshu can bring him to school with him. The next morning, as Josuke and Joshu are heading to school, however, they end up on a street known as Shakedown Street, to where basically everyone on the street is just there to scam you. During this, however, as they attempt to escape, Joshu awakens his stand power of Nut King Call, in which by planting nuts and bolts in the target, Nut King Call can create basically functional artificial joints. But when he removes one of these nuts from the bolt, which can also be done almost instantly, the object breaks up and is disassembled, causing damage to the target. As they attempt to go to the street, the residents began to use a stand called Les Fayas. I don't know how to speak French. I'm just gonna call it the leaf stand because that was a horrible pronunciation, but it's actually an interesting stand as it actually doesn't have a specific real user, and it's actually just a stand that's bound to Shakedown Road itself. And it essentially can remove friction from objects and people, causing them to stick together permanently and continue to move forward. Josuke and Joshu get ambushed and extorted as they walk down the road, with different scammy claims going on, ranging from them breaking a mirror to destroying a phone, and the residents demanding some sort of compensation for this. However, they start to suspect something is off, and by filming themselves and examining how the items move, they piece together that the Jinko leaf trails that they walk on are transporting things and people artificially. And the key moment comes when Josuke spots the stand underneath the leaves, and both he and Joshu recognize the stand effect that's going on. Using that insight, Joshu intercepts a stash of cash during a forced drop-off and escapes, later awakening his stand Nut King Call, while Josuke uses the soft and wet to steal the money back himself and pay off all the debt that they incurred. In this arc, however, they never really technically defeat the stand. They just kind of outsmart it and counter the extortion by just understanding it and intercepting how the leaves work, ultimately walking away from this scammy road without being trapped by its tricks. Josuke makes a call to Yasuho while she's in class, and although she doesn't answer, when she checks her phone, she can see his location, in which on the map it shows that he's on Shakedown Road, but there's a landmark nearby named JOSTAR JIZOU. Yasuho learns that the monument was built as a memorial to Johnny Joestar, who apparently died an ominous but tragic death approximately 100 years ago, in which Johnny had came to Japan as a visiting American jockey to aid the government's horsemanship program, as well as do something with the importation of foreign-grown fruits. Now, how do you expect the GOAT Johnny Joestar to go out? The legendary horse rider who traveled across all of America with his best bro of Gyro to chase after the holy corpse. He was murdered by an unknown person, by a boulder crushing his head. Yeah, not what you expected, right? Well, it's a lot more deep than that, and that's the story that most people are told, but back at Shakedown Road, Josuke comes across this statue and he notices that the man, Johnny Joestar on it, has a hat very similar to his own, when an old pet shop owner comes along and fills him in with the legend behind the statue, which he had heard from his grandmother. Though Johnny did come to Japan to teach military horsemanship, this was actually a cover-up for his true intention, which was actually involving saving the life of his wife, Rina. The two had met on a ship crossing the Atlantic Ocean after the Steel Ball Run race, and they immediately fell in love. And they ended up living together on a ranch for several years when Rina then was suddenly struck with an incurable disease. The side effects of the disease were at first memory loss, but eventually became life-threatening when Rina's skin basically began to turn into like a rock. So Johnny decided to bring his wife back to Japan, as he felt it was best that she spend her last days in the land which she was born in. However, Johnny wanted to do anything to be able to save his wife, so he decided to do the unthinkable, and he headed all the way back to New York by himself to obtain the Saint Corpse parts, which he hoped to remove Rina's disease, since, you know, it's the corpse of Jesus Christ. However, the corpse was considered the guardian deity of North America, and it was supposed to stay sealed underground. But Johnny felt like he had no other choice but to steal the corpse, which he successfully does, bringing it back with him to Japan, with the American government, of course, following after him, as this is a pretty important thing for them. Johnny takes the corpse back with him, traveling to Morio, hiding it in a cave at the base of the meditation pine on Morio's coast, bringing his wife Rina to the corpse as well. So by removing the disease from Rina, this also meant exchanging the disease for something of equal value, or as you Full Metal Alchemist fans might recognize, this is the law of equivalent exchange. Using the power of the corpse, Rina is successfully cured, returning back to her normal self, but the curse was unfortunately passed on to their son, George Joestar III. Johnny rushes away on his horse, taking the corpse and his son with him, and he uses his Tusk's ability to force the corpse out of his son, but remember, there's the rule of equivalent exchange. So now the curse now starts to go into Johnny, causing the Tusk bullet to shoot from his son into Johnny as he falls to the ground, in which then a boulder then falls on top of his head, with Johnny effectively being killed by his own stand of Tusk. But he also did save the life of both his wife and son, which, man, rest in peace to the GOAT. Please leave an F in chat for Johnny. I did not expect him to go out like that. Also, if you wondered what happened to the corpse after this, by the time that this happened, the government from America had returned and they were able to retrieve the corpse and take it back with them. But this is the legend of the JOSTAR JIZOU. After learning about this backstory, and with Yasuho also learning about this backstory, we see that she goes back to the meditation pine, which has two trunks, with one of them actually being inside the plot of land owned by the Higashikata family and their mansion. Yasuho takes a closer look at the pine, seeing a hole, when boom, a hand reaches out, dragging her into it. And let's just say this person inside this hole is being really feely and touchy on her, which, like, bro, get your hand off of Joshu's woman. You don't want to know what bowl haircut having head is gonna do to you if he finds out about this. Except when Yasuho looks around, she's actually in the Higashikata family cellar below the meditation pine, where TSURUGI is there just acting all casual, offering her some snacks. Also, side note, this is when Yasuho realizes that TSURUGI is not a girl but actually a boy, and TSURUGI reveals that for some reason, the Higashikata family has a tradition where the first son is born, he is dressed as a girl until the age of 12, and this is as a way to trick some demons and go against some charms and spirits, and also that TSURUGI has a stand named Paper Moon King. This stand basically works by altering people's perception through objects, and that's through folded origami paper, and when someone interacts with the affected object, their senses get scrambled. So they start to like misinterpret things that they see, they hear, or they read, basically just causing a lot of confusion in them. So the stand doesn't really directly attack someone. Instead, it basically just creates a lot of misunderstandings, but these misunderstandings are so severe that people often hurt themselves or make really bad decisions without even knowing that anything is wrong. Yasuho attempts to leave, but as she leaves, she sees several rooms in the cellar, one of them mysteriously having a sailor outfit and some random figures, which almost look like a prison, and this looks exactly like the outfit that Kira/Josuke wears. Yasuho, unable to leave, however, falls asleep in the cellar when all of a sudden a mysterious shadowy figure appears as a man creepily hovers over her sleeping, saying that Josuke is no longer needed on this land as a film comes from his eyes, which he places over Yasuho, attempting to suffocate her. Yasuho pulls out her stand Paisley Park, as we also get the reveal that this person is YOTSUYA, who is actually the architect who built the Higashikata mansion. And using her stand, Yasuho uses some origami bananas which were empowered by Paper Moon King to trip YOTSUYA, and in the confusion, she's able to escape. If that sounds confusing, by the way, it's because it really is that confusing to read. We're now at the next day with Josuke waking up with his #1 fangirl loving all over him, as Josuke leaves and continues investigating the Higashikata household as he sees TSURUGI walk out of the house walking through an orchard, and thinks that he'll start investigating by investigating TSURUGI first, when NORIUSKE comes up to him asking him where he's going. And you would think Josuke would play dumb or lie, but no, he's just like, well, I'm investigating your family because you're actually kinda sus, and I have some questions, so I was gonna go interrogate TSURUGI, which, you know, makes sense. To tell somebody that he's following their grandson to interrogate them takes some balls, or in this case, 4 balls, which explains why he's so fearless. But NORIUSKE tells him, well then, ask away, I got nothing to hide. And Josuke just starts laying it on him, asking him about his past, what was with Holly Joestar's illness, who he is. He just wants answers to everything. And NORIUSKE is like, just slow down, one question at a time, when Josuke bluntly asks, did you kill Yoshikage Kira? Stunning NORIUSKE. NORIUSKE responds that that's a huge accusation, but the answer is no, and he actually has 3 reasons. And at this point, both of them are basically hiding nothing. NORIUSKE knows that Josuke knows a lot by this point, and Josuke knows that NORIUSKE does as well. NORIUSKE explains that the first answer is that he knows about the power of the wall eyes. If they say that half of his body is that of Kira's, then there's no reason he would have taken in Josuke, knowing that he is part Kira. If he hated Kira enough to kill him, he would have slimed out Josuke too. The second reason is he feels regret regarding Kira's death because the Joestar bloodline share the same fate as the Higashikata family of the illness that has been passed down from generations. And the third reason is that he actually needed Kira. Kira knew of some way to cure this illness, and he actually found a cure for it, but for some reason he died, leaving, well, only half of his thoughts in Josuke, and that NORIUSKE thinks that those answers of the cure must be somewhere in Kira/now Josuke. And it's for that reason that he decided to take Josuke into this family. But he also says that he does not know who is the other person that Kira fused with, but at the end of the day, the only one who can find out who that would be is gonna be Josuke. Which I have to say was all 3 really good points to explain why he did not kill Kira. But then Josuke asks a pretty good question though, and asks, wait, if this illness is passed down from generations, doesn't that mean that you, as in NORIUSKE, must have gotten it at some point? So how did he cure it? when NORIUSKE says that he can't tell him exactly, but he was cured in exchange for his parents dying, and that's all that he really knows. And then Josuke asks one more question. He asks what happened between YASUHO and TSURUGI, with NORIUSKE saying that he's actually not sure himself, but he's gonna tag along to go with and go ask TSURUGI as well, as they both head towards the Higashikata cellar. As they approach it, we also see NORIUSKE use his stand, King Nothing, which is a long-range stand that is basically able to track targets by memorization of smells, copying their movements in a sequence. So kind of like Moody Blues from part 5 to be honest, but kind of different. But before they can enter in, Josuke tells NORIUSKE that he feels a very strange presence. And then all of a sudden, their conversation is cut short when the ground around them is suddenly assaulted by pots rolling towards them from every direction, which is actually an attack from YOTSUYA's stand. As rocks and things start flying at them, they attempt to go into the hatch when all of a sudden TSURUGI closes it, leaving them out there as they start banging on it, trying to open it, when TSURUGI tells NORIUSKE that if he just gives Josuke up, that he'll let NORIUSKE in. But it's for somewhat of a good reason, as YOTSUYA told TSURUGI that if he's able to get to kill Josuke, that he already knows the cure for the family's illness and he can help them out, which obviously is a lie, but TSURUGI is a little kid, so you can't really blame him. Josuke attempts to break all the pots and everything coming towards them, but it only makes it worse as a bunch of shards start to cling to him, forcing NORIUSKE to pull him to safety while he uses soft and wet to steal the weight of the shrapnel, now allowing them to escape. But being still determined to rescue YASUHO, Josuke and NORIUSKE fight through different waves of just objects coming at them, including hundreds of spiked chestnuts now shooting at them, which Josuke is able to counter by using his soft and wet to steal the moisture from them, eventually getting to the point to where they have to forcefully break into the cellar, and as they enter in, they find YASUHO safe but asleep. NORIUSKE asks TSURUGI what was it that YOTSUYA told him, when he says that he saw a dog outside near the wall eyes that got turned into stone, similar to the family's illness. But he says that he saw YOTSUYA actually cure it by feeding it something. He doesn't know what it was, but after he had the dog eat whatever that was, the dog was cured. And then he told him that he can help the family cure their illness, but only if they can lure Josuke into the cellar, that way he can kill him. Before they can process all of this, however, they hear a noise in the cellar and they go to check on YASUHO, finding out that YOTSUYA used a different entrance to now kidnap YASUHO again. Josuke gets super angry from this. I mean, this guy stole his waifu again. So he says that he's gonna go after him when NORIUSKE is like, wait a second, I got this. And NORIUSKE summons his stand King Nothing to track YASUHO using her scent from all of the belongings that she left behind. They follow the stand outside to a patch of ground when King Nothing suddenly turns around, with Josuke looking in that area, finding YASUHO hidden behind a rock. But as they go to grab her, they're suddenly ambushed by YOTSUYA himself, who is literally made out of living stone, so he was hiding in the rock. Josuke is able to knock him away, but as they're trying to process how they just saw this person emerge from the ground again as like a rock, a wave of pesticide canisters start rolling towards Josuke and NORIUSKE. YOTSUYA suddenly appears and he starts boasting that he's gonna seize the Higashikata family's wealth, and he's saying that Josuke is already defeated. But Josuke responds by just capturing him in a soft and wet bubble and carrying him away towards the coastline. And it's also here where we get the reveal that YOTSUYA's stand is named I Am a Rock, and basically it causes rocks to converge with like a lot of force, like a crushing force. He uses this ability to pop the bubbles that Josuke had him in, just as that moment as the pesticides also start coming towards Josuke. But rather than just run away or retreat, Josuke grabs YOTSUYA and pushes them both off of the cliff and into the sea. And since they're both now underwater, Josuke's ability is using bubbles, so he can use it in very interesting ways here, like using his bubbles to communicate with YOTSUYA and also restrain him. YOTSUYA, who's losing a lot of air at this point, turns himself into a full stone to survive. And NORIUSKE, who's just basically running full support at this point, also throws some fishing nets into the sea, which Josuke is able to use to tie YOTSUYA up in this stone form. Josuke uses his bubbles to communicate, and he gives YOTSUYA an ultimatum. Either he explains who he really is, or Josuke's gonna leave him just trapped underwater forever in this stone form. YOTSUYA is pretty angry at this point, and he says some pretty shocking things. He says the person born from stone is actually Josuke, and that he was the one that put Josuke between the rocks and was the one that killed him. But somehow he actually survived, and if it weren't for Kira, Josuke would have never been able to emerge. And then he attempts to attack Josuke again, but honestly, Josuke pretty easily overpowers him at this point since they're underwater, and as he defeats him, YOTSUYA begins to break down and die. But as he dies, he whispers to Josuke that he will be betrayed by the Higashikata family as his final message. Also, as YOTSUYA starts sinking, Josuke notices a mysterious fruit sinking into the ocean coming from YOTSUYA's bag. Keep this in mind, this is going to become very important shortly. They bring YOTSUYA's crumbled body back to the cellar, trying to study how he's a rock but also a human, when TSURUGI asks if he had some sort of fruit on him, since he swears that he saw him feed a dog with a fruit and that cured the dog from the illness. When Josuke says that he did see it, but it got washed into the sea during their battle. So now Josuke has another mission in this story, and that's to now find out what this fruit was and hopefully solve the Higashikata family's illness. We then see YASUHO, who's back in the cellar after they saved her, and as she's waking up, she sees a fruit in her hand, but her being so tired, she just kind of moves it aside and goes back to sleep. A little bit of time passes, and as Josuke goes to check on YASUHO, he sees that she's missing. But it was actually that she just woke up and NORIUSKE just told her, like, we're already done, you can go home, when all of a sudden, a dog emerges from the wall, as TSURUGI points out that that was the same dog that he saw YOTSUYA heal before. And you won't guess what the dog has, because in the dog's mouth is the fruit that they've been looking for, as Josuke recognizes that that's a fruit that YOTSUYA had, as they all rush to get the fruit from the dog's mouth before it eats it. They start to inspect the fruit, and for NORIUSKE literally running a fruit business, even he doesn't recognize the fruit, saying that it kind of smells like a fig, but he doesn't really know what it is, but it does look like it's a fruit that came from a tree. So NORIUSKE uses his King Nothing to maybe track the scent of the fruit back to this tree to see where it came from. But his stand does have a range to it, so at least near the cellar, they don't detect the fruit anywhere. Wanting to learn more about this fruit, NORIUSKE decides that they should all go to his fruit shop to do some more research and look into what this is. They go to visit the shop enjoying a parfait when a message comes in from JOBIN Higashikata, the eldest brother, that he's now back in the country, and like a ninja, all of a sudden he just appears right in front of them, which also, by the way, you look outside the window and you see that he pulled up to the shop in a Lamborghini. Man, the Higashikata family is just balling. As NORIUSKE and JOBIN are catching up as he just arrived back from a trip to both Vietnam and the Philippines, they start walking away when Josuke notices that the King Nothing stand has now attached to a handkerchief that JOBIN dropped to the ground, with the King Nothing stand having followed the mystery fruit scent. However, Josuke doesn't point it out right now because he basically realizes that JOBIN might know something about the fruit that he's just not explaining, so he decides to do some detective work into him. We head back to the Higashikata household as JOBIN arrives as well, giving souvenirs to the whole family of a bunch of tacky little things, as they head to his room, seeing a collection of insects and beetles. We'll get right back to that part shortly. Josuke heads outside talking to TSURUGI, saying that he saw when his dad first arrived back at the fruit parlor, and that he wants TSURUGI to tell him what is JOBIN's stand ability, as he's actually planning to corner him, which, again, telling a child that he wants to fight his dad, which, man, Josuke all throughout this part just has so much balls. He further explains to TSURUGI, however, that he saw the fruit that they were looking for get attracted to JOBIN, so he must know something about the fruit, with TSURUGI just looking around like, is this guy seriously asking me to give up my own dad? TSURUGI does tell him that as long as he promises not to hurt his dad, he'll help him out, as they're all looking for this fruit, and that once Josuke finds out where this fruit is from, he can't hurt JOBIN, with Josuke of course agreeing to this. Which, now I want you to guess how you can defeat JOBIN. Okay, you can guess forever because you'll never guess what's about to happen. Remember how I told you to remember that room of insects? TSURUGI tells Josuke that his dad's weakness is stag beetles. Yeah, even Josuke looks at TSURUGI like, what are you even saying? TSURUGI tells Josuke to go to JOBIN's insect room and to challenge him to a stag beetle fight, and that because of the beetle fight, if he can win, JOBIN's pride will be hurt and that will make him weak and start to talk and expose things that he knows. Kinda similar to like stealing a treasure in Persona. Josuke heads to the room where we see Jobin talking with Joshu when we see that Jobin doesn't just have a room of insects, he has a whole back closet as well filled with even more insects. Josuke is pretty smart in getting Jobin to expose his weakness, and he basically starts rage baiting him, pointing out little details about the beetles like how one's mandible looks a little weaker than the others, so he bets that it's gonna lose in the fight, which upsets Jobin for talking about his prized beetles like that. After successfully rage baiting him and triggering Jobin, Josuke starts to walk out when Jobin says, "Wait, you were talking about these beetles, right? Well, let's find out who's stronger and let's have them fight." So yes, at this point, we're having a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure beetle fight. This is so insane. They set some rules for the fight. Each fight is going to be 45 seconds, and if the beetle either dies or if it gets pushed out of the ring, it loses. And they both each have paintbrushes which they can kind of use to direct the beetles as well. But of course, with a match like this, you have to have some sort of a wager. So the wager for this round is that the loser has to shave their eyebrows. This is truly only a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure type of plot point. The match begins and the beetles grapple each other, locking each other's mandibles, which are basically their horns, basically having a sumo match as Josuke's beetle is almost knocked out of the ring. But then suddenly it pushes back, snapping Jobin's beetle's mandible off. The beetles continue to grapple it out like a WWE match when Jobin's beetle gets such a tight grip on Josuke's that it literally almost rips Josuke's beetle's head off. But Josuke has a secret trick up his sleeve. Before this match started, he used his soft and wet to put female pheromones in the hairs of the paintbrush using his bubbles, which when he uses that to push the beetle, since he has a male beetle, the female hormones basically are like an adrenaline boost to it. So when he uses the paintbrush on his beetle and when the bubble pops, releasing this pheromone, Josuke's beetle basically goes Super Saiyan, picking up Jobin's beetle and suplexes it out of the ring, crowning Josuke as the winner, with Jobin taking out a razor and shaving off his eyebrow, which, yeah, just look at him. But Jobin's a little bit hurt about this, so he challenges Josuke to a second round, but now the stakes are raised even higher because Josuke tells Jobin to wager his Lamborghini. But that's actually because Josuke suspects that the car's event data recorder would have clues about the fruit's location. But of course, Jobin doesn't recognize this. He just wants to fight again, so he says, "All right, let's put that up on the line." Jobin accepts the round 2, and as the beetles begin the fight, they lock their mandibles. But this time, Jobin's beetle is basically completely destroying Josuke's and bullying it all around the ring, with Josuke realizing that Jobin must be cheating or something. But as this happens, Josuke looks up and he sees Jobin's stand come out, which is named Speed King, which we'll get into how that ability works later. But Josuke is able to realize that this isn't just a beetle fight. All along, this has basically been a stand fight. Jobin's beetle continues to overpower Josuke's when Josuke is able to use his soft and wet to take some hornet venom from a dead hornet that was nearby on the room and implants those soft and wet bubbles onto Jobin's brush. So then when Jobin brushes his beetle, it was actually slowly poisoning it throughout the fight, eventually leading to Jobin's beetle dying. With Josuke successfully being the winner and getting a $400,000 car, which, man, pretty easy way to get a Lamborghini. But as he tries to walk out, Jobin confronts Josuke, realizing that something was up with the way that he won, kind of hinting towards the fact that he's catching on that Josuke is a stand user as well. And Jobin also questions him on why he even wanted the Lamborghini, but as Josuke turns around, he uses a soft and wet bubble to transport the key out of the room and over to Tsurugi. And we also see a flashback that during this fight, while it was going on, Tsurugi went to Yasuho, filling her in on what was happening and telling her that Tsurugi is going to need Yasuho's help to look into the Lamborghini's event data recorder, as Tsurugi and Josuke already planned this from before the fight even began. But as Jobin asks Josuke about why he wanted the Lamborghini, Josuke causes a distraction by triggering the fire sprinklers in the room, allowing him to escape without outing himself. Yasuho and Tsurugi go to the garage, seeing the Lamborghini, which I gotta give it to Jobin. He has a pretty sick ride. It's even a manual. When suddenly Yasuho's phone buzzes, and when she looks at it, she sees two options to select for either a grilled meat lunchbox or a flashlight, which she shows to Tsurugi saying, what is this? With Tsurugi saying it doesn't matter, just choose one, and then she clicks the flashlight, with Paisley Park, Yasuho's stand, suddenly appearing in the Lamborghini and giving Yasuho a flashlight before showing the travels of the car in Morio. Which, yes, this GPS stand is now this broken to now just give items to her and allow her to locate whatever she wants. They look into the car's drive recorder, but it only shows that the car went from this house in Morio to the fruit parlor, but nowhere else, which doesn't really help. But then they have the bright idea to investigate further and have Paisley Park check the street cameras to see every time that the Lamborghini stopped at a red light to see maybe if they can find something through that. They skim through all the footage when bingo, they see someone come up to the car at a red light and exchange the mysterious fruit with JOBIN. Now, when I say Paisley Park is broken, I mean just from seeing this guy, Paisley Park can then look up who this guy is, seeing that it's someone named AISHO Dainjiyama, and they find his address, and they also find that he worked at the Morio baseball stadium. And guess who was the architect for that stadium? It was YOTSUYA, the architect of the Higashikata mansion from before, which just further connects the spiderweb of characters of Jojolion so far. Yasuho and TSURUGI investigate further into this, going to the intersection, and they see AISHO standing at the corner holding some of the same fruit. And with TSURUGI seeing this, it proves that this fruit does exist, which is the same fruit that can cure the illness that he has. And with him having this means that this fruit must be coming somewhere from within Morio. They head to this intersection, now having a lead to follow, and they track this mysterious person to a roof near the stadium. And both Yasuho and TSURUGI basically fuse their stands together, with Yasuho using her Paisley Park in her phone, and then TSURUGI turning that phone into an origami frog to track after AISHO. As they spy on him, they witness AISHO give the fruit to a man who eats it, and when he does, it regrows his missing legs, but also his eyes shatter into stone, just kind of showing that this fruit has some sort of equivalent exchange to it. Keep that in mind, that's going to become very important later. AISHO, however, spots the phone following it, and he steps on it, crushing it. And since the phone was imbued with both of the stands of both Yasuho and TSURUGI, this actually causes damage to both of their bodies. But they are able to narrowly survive when AISHO gets distracted by a banana peel, which also came from Paisley Park just in the nick of time, similar to how it had Yasuho choose a flashlight before. But with him getting distracted, that allows them to now escape, and they're able to recover the Paisley Park phone. Now back to safety, they use Paisley Park to check AISHO's security card at the stadium, where they see that he recently exited the stadium about 9 minutes ago. And since they saw him outside giving the fruit to that old man, that must mean that the fruit was coming somewhere inside the stadium, since he had to have brought it from there. Hoping to find the fruit, they head to the stadium, where AISHO's stand starts attacking them, named Dubi-wa. A very silly sounding stand name, but basically his stand attacks by manifesting like a deadly wind vortex that forms around the victim's breath, essentially stealing the oxygen from them so that they can't breathe as they try and run away from him. Yasuho and TSURUGI barely escape the stadium as they're running away from this stand by jumping through the window, and they hop on a bus hoping to finally get out of its range, but Dubi-wa appears inside of the vehicle from their breath again, trapping them now inside the bus as they're forced to hold their breath as they continue to run out of oxygen. Meanwhile, outside, AISHO realizes that he's being attacked by stand users, and in a panic, he calls JOBIN to tell him that someone is looking after them and someone is getting close to the fruits, which you can see that JOBIN thinks that this is coming from Josuke, since he thought that his behavior earlier was just a little bit strange. We then see a quick flashback to AISHO's past, where we learn that similar to YOTSUYA, he is also a rock human, and in his past, he lived with a girlfriend, but when he revealed to her his rock-like nature, this led to her essentially betraying him and actually cheating on him, and then also selling their house. And while he was asleep, while being in rock form, as they're bulldozing this house, this nearly kills him when the house is being demolished. Basically just a quick backstory to show that why he's a villain, but also the most important thing here is the fact that he is a rock human very similar to YOTSUYA. Back on the bus, however, Yasuho and TSURUGI eventually are able to outsmart him. As they finally escape the bus and they're running away from his vortex, all of a sudden in the area, JOBIN appears since AISHO had called him earlier, with AISHO going up to JOBIN asking for his permission to kill TSURUGI when actually it's not even JOBIN. It was actually TSURUGI's stand, Paper Moon King, since he can create illusions, in which he created an illusion to make AISHO think that all of the buses around them were actually JOBIN. So AISHO basically runs in front of a bus thinking that it was JOBIN, and he gets isekai'd and he gets ran over, and very similar to YOTSUYA, he turns back into a rock and starts crumbling into dust. And now with that fight over, we go to the next day and we are about to get some major advancements into the mystery of finding out Josuke, and these next parts are going to be pretty important, so listen up. The next day, we see YASUHO and TSURUGI just taking in everything that happened, the fact that they were just attacked, the fact that the guy was literally a rock, and the fact that JOBIN was cooperating with them. And we also get the reveal that the fruit is called the LOCACACA fruit, or ROKAKAKA fruit. Depending on the translation, that'll trip me up throughout the video, but just know that LOCACACA and ROKAKAKA fruit are the same thing. Josuke shows up, and we see YASUHO, after not seeing her man for so long, just bursts into tears and is so happy to see him. And he does the ultimate Chad move here and just ignores her and goes to talk to TSURUGI. But then he does recognize YASUHO after that, and they're at least able to hug it out. But like, man, YASUHO really missed him, and she is just like sobbing in his arms. Let's just pray that Joshu doesn't see this. They both walk off together holding hands, and they have a cute little almost date together. They have a moment to where they're sitting together as Josuke is singing about fried chicken and fries, with YASUHO just so in love. She's just looking like 10 out of 10 performance. Josuke can never do anything wrong. However, as they're sitting there, Josuke's attention shifts to a girl nearby sitting on the ground. And as they meet eyes, she says, "Later, Sechan," and then walks away. YASUHO sees Josuke looking around and asks what's wrong, but Josuke just says that there's something that caught his attention and he has to go check it out real quick, and he leaves YASUHO chasing after this mysterious girl, which is good to advance our plot, but bad for YASUHO's heart, as it's probably shattered right now. Josuke goes to chase after the girl, and when he finally catches up to her, thinking about how she's just a little bit weird, she looks up at Josuke and says that he looks an awful lot like Yoshikage Kira, but something's just a little bit different about him. And then she runs off again, saying that that's not the Sechan she was looking for, as Josuke is just standing there in shock about how she even knows who Yoshikage Kira is. As she runs off, however, Josuke uses a soft and wet bubble that goes after her, and after it looks at her ID, he's able to see that her name is Karera Sakunami. As he calls out her name, this causes her to pause and turn around, running back to him and jumping into his arms, as she hugs onto him, saying that this must be her Sechan that she was looking for, as he remembered her name. As she just starts asking a bunch of questions about where he's been and where he lives now, and who was that girl that he was with Josuke not remembering anything about this girl. Josuke at this point wants to find out who this girl is and how she knows about Yoshikage Kira and how she recognizes him, so he continues to follow her around, but he sees that she just keeps doing very weird things like stealing free condiment packets and having a snack by mixing lard, sugar, and soy sauce on bread. And Josuke is just kind of confused about how he can even get the information out of her because she's just really strange. She pulls out her phone and says that she has a photo of her old Sechan and asks Josuke if he wants to see it. Flipping over her phone, and yeah, you're seeing that right. That's a picture of her and also Yoshikage Kira and a mysterious third person who oddly looks like Josuke, but not this Josuke, kind of like part 4 Josuke. Josuke looks at this confused, seeing Kira but not knowing who is next to him, but Karera says that this must be him, with her revealing his name, as that mysterious person is Josefumi KUJO. At this point, she just said his name. She said his real name. Josuke is actually Josefumi KUJO. As she starts to walk away, we also see a glimpse of her stand, Love Love Deluxe, which honestly doesn't really do much this arc, but basically her stand is that she can control other people's hair. But as she walks away, Josuke is still in shock, and he continues to follow her as she says that she wants to visit Kira's old apartment, when Josuke breaks the hard news to her, telling her that Kira is already dead. Of course, this shocks her as she starts talking about this and how she didn't even know that he was dead, and she reveals that the last time she saw Kira, he had a LOCACACA tree in his apartment, that he had because he was trying to save his mom, which is Holly JOESTAR Kira. But before they can finish this conversation, all of a sudden a pair of rock humans come up named the Aphex brothers, who were actually sent to ambush Carrera. They use their stands named Scott Key number 1 and number 2 to attack, which is basically a stand that's inside of a soccer ball that can basically generate a poisonous gas, but one of them covers Carrera in a flammable gas while the other one sets her on fire. But just before it actually lights her on fire, Josuke is able to use one of his soft and wet bubbles to basically negate that attack. And all of a sudden, we see a really cool fight between Josuke and the Aphex brothers, with them actually just like almost boxing it out, throwing punches back and forth. And I honestly can't wait to see the Jojolion anime. I know it'll be definitely a few years, but this fight would be pretty cool to see them animate Josuke basically boxing it out with them. As they attempt to use their poisonous gas again, Josuke is able to trap it in one of his soft and wet bubbles, then using it to cover one of the Aphex brothers. And as the other brother goes up to, of course, help the other brother, in the background, Carrera uses a lighter on a trail of gasoline, successfully combining with the gas that Josuke had on the brothers, igniting them both on fire. And similar to the rock humans before it, since we see they're defeated, they now start crumbling into dust. And after defeating them, we see Carrera just look at Josuke and say that she's now decided that she's not going to run away and she wants to stay in the town of Morio a little bit longer, and that she actually wants to find the rollercoaster fruit. But then, very interestingly, she looks at Josuke and says that he must look the way he does because he did an equivalent exchange with Kira. And then she just runs away. Of course, Josuke yells after her, trying to catch up, but she's able to escape. So yeah, she's just a very strange person that kind of knows a lot, but we don't really know why at this point. Also, before we head to the next arc, in the beginning of this chapter, we saw some background info into the rock humans, which I think is kind of weird that they didn't reveal this throughout the story, but they just kind of put it in a random page, but we'll go through it right now. This page says, let's oversee a hibernating rock human, and basically explains how the rock humans like to hibernate at shrine grounds and parks and also underneath trees, but that they hibernate for about 30 to 90 days. And once they're done, they won't need to sleep again for at least 2 months. During hibernation, they don't breathe necessarily, but they have like faint skin respiration in the cracks of the rock, and they also have no scent while hibernating, so they're basically undetectable, but if you do accidentally chip one, you'll actually see them start to bleed. Also, that 95% of all rock humans are stand users, and that they can come in both male and female. And when they're out of their rock form, there's visually no difference from them from actual humans, but that they cannot actually have children with normal humans. And that they also have stages of transformation that they go through every 6 years or so, and that occurs during their hibernation cycle. But that their lifespan can also be up to about 240 years. Also, they don't know exactly how many rock humans there are in the world, since it's kind of hard to find them, and also since they disintegrate when they die, but they're just kind of out there. The next chapter, we also get a short backstory into the LOCACACA fruit that says that during the age of exploration, Australian explorers found the LOCACACA fruit on the island of New Guinea, and that when the island locals ate the fruit, it would heal them, but it would also cause parts of their body to turn into a rock through the equivalent exchange. Like we see a guy who had no teeth, eats the fruit, and then he grows a new set of rock teeth. But it does say that in World War II, when Japan occupied half of New Guinea, the fruit suddenly disappeared. Back at the Higashikata mansion now, Josuke calls his waifu YASUHO and has her do some searching into this JOSEFUMI KUJO guy, when all of a sudden HATO returns home, who is the eldest Higashikata sister, and she comes back home bringing her new boyfriend. And yes, you're seeing that right. She brought home a thumb-looking guy that honestly kind of looks like a blonde version of Ferb, with the family actually just looking at him just like, who is this ugly guy she brought home? He introduces himself as Tamaki Damo, as Joshu is just looking at this laughing, thinking that this is the funniest thing, and despite the fact that he looks like a 40-year-old wannabe 80s gangster, he's only 23 years old, and he's balding, and short, and fat, and has a weird mustache. Yeah, I honestly don't know how he pulled an actual model like HATO. Also, I know what you're thinking, and yes, when NORIUSKE asks how long they've been together, HATO says that they just met each other and they They've done the thing twice already. Yikes. I guess that's really low standards. But as Damo starts to touch a few things around the house, the maid Nijimura starts to notice that there's like visible fingerprints left on everything that he had touched. NORIUSKE sits down with him in the living room trying to figure out who is this guy that his daughter brought home, as Josuke goes back on the phone with YASUHO, as YASUHO says that she was able to find Josefumi's passport and that she's going to fax it over to the Higashikata household so that Josuke can take a look at it. NORIUSKE continues to try and make small talk with Damo when Josuke says that he's going to step out for a bit, and NORIUSKE asks him to go get Nijimura, who has also stepped away but she hasn't been responding to him. At the same time that Josuke walks away, Damo also says that he needs to step away to go use the restroom. Josuke leaves the room, and as he goes to look for Nijimura, he sees a bunch of weird handprints on the wall, and also Nijimura's hat stuck to the wall, looking like if she's been like Ghostbuster ectoplasm fused into the wall. Back inside the living room, Joshu notices Damo walking around through the hallways, and he comes out of the laundry room. And as he goes to try and tells him that that's not the right room and correct him on where the restroom is, Joshu walks into the room that he just came out of, also seeing a bunch of weird handprints all over the wall. Meanwhile, we see that the fax has finally been received and has been printed that was sent by YASUHO. And although it does say the name Josefumi Kujo on it, it actually shows the passport picture as a picture of Damo, who has been using the Josefumi Kujo name as an alias. Daya actually notices the fax come in and she comes to pick it up, but if you remember, she's half blind. So she can only really read the name of the fax, but she can't actually see the picture that well to see that that is actually Damo, the person in their house. Back to Joshu, we see him open a locker door in the room to look more inside what all these weird prints are, when he trips and hits his head on a faucet, and now both him and his Nut King call stand are melted and drained into the faucet. Hato tries to ask Daya what is this paper that came in when Daya says that this is a fax for Josuke, and she runs out the room trying to give it to Josuke, but Josuke tells her to stay away when she falls to the ground and starts to get liquefied as well. Back in the living room, we see Damo walk back in as NORIUSKE takes a drink of a glass of champagne he had, when the bubbles start to distort his skin and he also starts to melt. As if you haven't guessed it already, we get the reveal that Damo is actually a villain. Yes, Hato's stupid self got with a super ugly guy who is now picking off her family one by one. And Damo's behavior switches from like an innocent person to a lot more of an aggressive tone, as he reveals that he's at this house to solve 3 problems, and he reveals his stand Vitamin C. And it's actually a pretty powerful stand in that it can use its softening power to basically render everyone powerless before Damo. And although he's not really that strong himself and his stand doesn't really have that much of like a physical capability, whenever they're softened, he can at least like punch the person or he can at least move them around. But he says the first reason that he's here is he wants to investigate the disappearance of an architect, 2 twin brothers, and a security guard, which we know at this point to be some of the rock humans we've met throughout this part so far. The second thing he is here for is Yoshikage Kira, and then he further explains the backstory on why he wants Kira. And this next part is low-key my favorite arc of this manga, so listen up, this is actually going to be very important. We get a flashback to 2 years ago, which is the year 2009, and we see Kira on a boat as a ship doctor, and as he's treating a man, he discovers a blood trail, and after following it, the blood trail leads to some rocks. But as he investigates the rocks further, he sees it kind of looks like a person with blood coming out of it, which we also learn later that this is actually AISHO from before. Kira asks one of the ship workers about the container containing the rocks and learns that it's from New Guinea and also that it's set to go to the Higashikata fruit parlor. After leaving the ship back in Morio, we see him talking with Ojiro, which yes, that's Ojiro from the very first stand fight all the way at the beginning of this series, when he sees AISHO leaving the ship and he sees him load up some mysterious fruit, in which he decides to follow after him to learn more about this strange fruit that was found in the container with him, and how also he wants to investigate how this person is a rock but also a person. When we also see that Kira was at a ramen shop with Josefumi, as he thinks about how he wants to steal one of these fruits, as something must be going on with it. And before we continue on the next part of that, we also get another backstory within a backstory of the first time that Josefumi and Kira met. And this is actually when Josefumi is a very little child at the beach with his mom when he almost drowns, and he's rushed to the hospital where he gets treated by Holly Joestar Kira, who is trying to treat him, but he has a blood clot that she's not able to get out of him, and it's threatening Josefumi's life. Luckily, however, her son is with her, which is Yoshikage Kira, who is also a ship doctor, and so Holly has Yoshikage use his stand Killer Queen and use its sheer heart attack ability to literally go inside Josefumi's bloodstream and just blow up the blood clot, which he does, successfully saving Josefumi. Now back to the year 2009, we see a baseball player at the same stadium that we saw AISHO was at before, and he pays AISHO 200 million yen, which is about 1.2 million freedom dollars, for one of the LOCACACA fruits, as AISHO explains to him about the equivalent exchange and then leaves. But little did they both know is that Kira was actually spying on this transaction as it was happening. We see that this baseball player was actually suffering from an injury, but after he eats the fruit, he not only makes a full recovery, but he's also now known as God Shoulder, who suddenly not only made a complete recovery, but he's also throwing baseballs super hard now. However, the equivalent exchange takes place for him as well, as his teeth also start to turn into rock. After spying on them and learning more about this fruit, Kira meets up with Josefumi and tells him that they should team up to steal this miracle fruit, since it must be worth a lot of money. But Josefumi is like, bro, we know that this isn't about money, and he tells him that he already knows that Holly has a sickness and that Kira wants this fruit to heal her, and since Holly is the one that saved his life as a child, Josefumi will help out his bro. And this now starts a new Jo-Bro alliance, Kira and Josefumi, and I gotta admit, they're pretty awesome together. But Josefumi's pretty smart. He tells him that why would we just steal just this fruit? Josefumi says, wait, fruit grows from a tree. So if we can just take the tree, we can have infinite fruit, as he explains that he knows how to graft the tree branches together, which is basically like a technique to where you can take one tree branch and fuse it with another tree branch and it can grow into one organism. So all they have to do is get one tree branch that grows a LOCACACA fruit, and then they can graft it with another branch and they can continue to grow them. They both team up and they go and stalk AISHO, which they cause a distraction by blowing up an innocent motorcyclist, which causes a whole accident, which rest in peace that guy. But as AISHO is distracted by this accident, they're able to sneak up on him, stealing one of the branches of the LOCACACA tree that he had with him, successfully completing their mission as they now depart. We then skip 2 years later in the year 2011 now, where we see Josefumi and Kira are on a fishing boat, and as they're nearing the harbor, they see Carrera there, who has been stalking Josefumi, and she's standing on the shoreline trying to wave them down. However, as they're distracted by this, all of a sudden both Damo and YOTSUYA appear in the ship's cabin, saying that they realize that both Josefumi and Kira stole a part of the tree, in which Josefumi and Kira obviously attempt to fight against both of them, but Damo actually makes super quick work of them, softening both of them with this orange juice vitamin C power. And I gotta say, Damo might be ugly, but he is a mob boss. And immediately, he basically starts interrogating them, trying to find out where they hid the LOCACACA branches. But just in the nick of time, crazy woman Carrera is here, and she tries to shout out towards Josuke, which distracts both Damo and YOTSUYA, as YOTSUYA sends his stand I am a rock to pin her to the ground. And with Damo and YOTSUYA being distracted from this, Kira notices that he has one way out of this, his ultimate move. Kira then apologizes to Josefumi for getting him into all of this mess, and he tells him that there's only one way out of this. He had actually hid some of his sheer heart attack in Carrera's hair, which, if you don't remember from part 4, sheer heart attack can kind of act like a landmine. So when YOTSUYA pins her to the ground, it activates the sheer heart attack, and well, sheer heart attack explodes as everything just blows up, basically blowing up the ship and most of the harbor, where we now see on the shoreline, Josefumi starts dragging Kira deeper into the land, and he tries to feed him a LOCACACA fruit to hopefully save him. But as he tries, Kira has no reaction, showing that at this point, Kira is already dead from the explosion. Back on the harbor, we see Damo trying to recuperate with YOTSUYA, and he sends the Aphex twins after Josefumi and Kira, when at the same time cutting back to Kira and Josefumi. Josefumi just doesn't want to give up on his bro, and he tries to force feed him using the soft and wet bubbles. But as that goes into Kira, this now triggers an equivalent exchange. With Kira being seemingly healed, a lot of the wounds he has are now healed. but Josefumi's face begins to crumble away and turn into rock. Josefumi starts to cry out as he realizes that Kira had actually protected him from the blast when the Aphex brothers meet them and they confront Josefumi, which honestly, Josefumi is in a fit of rage. His best friend just died in his arms, so he basically wipes them with the floor and defeats them pretty quickly and knocks them over the edge back off of the cliff into the water. And at this point, realizing that there's almost no saving him, Josefumi confesses to the dead Kira that he secretly thinks that he should have died on the beach that day that they met, but that he's happy to have lived this long thanks to the help of both Holly and Kira. Josefumi then sacrifices himself, and he takes the last fruit they have from the branches, hoping that Kira will eventually be able to harvest them. As he takes the last LOCACACA, feeding it to Kira, and performs an equivalent exchange with him. At the same time this happens, an earthquake ruptures underneath them, and a fissure opens up, trapping them both underground. And well, you know what happened from there. Which, wow, that was actually just... what a backstory that was. I actually love that arc. It's a great complete story in one go, but there's still a lot going on. We now have to go back to the Higashikata household because, well, it's about to get real crazy. Back at the Higashikata household, Damo continues to interrogate NORIUSKE, asking him what he knows about Kira. And since NORIUSKE is basically turned into jello at this point, he uses a playing card, throwing it at NORIUSKE and actually cuts off one of his arms. Hato walks in at this point, and her dumb self doesn't realize that she brought in an actual villain. But Damo continues, now asking NORIUSKE about Josefumi and trying to press him about if Josefumi is alive. And not wanting his family to get hurt, NORIUSKE confesses that he thinks that Josefumi could be Josuke since he was found in the same area that Josefumi died. Wanting to confirm if this is true, Damo goes to the foyer, pushing past Hato and confronts Josuke, realizing that this is Josefumi, technically, with them both clashing with their stands. But Damo is able to start to liquefy Josuke when all of a sudden a huge bubble comes outside the foyer, carrying Hato, and as the bubble bursts, we see Hato use the heel on her shoe to bust through the window and impale Damo, and she continues to deliver like a Chun-Li heel kick strike on him repeatedly. And Hato actually was in love with Damo, like she is crying as she is doing this. She does not want to, and Damo actually tries to convince her that he still is in love with her too. But of course, this doesn't work. Like, come on, he was already shooting way out of his league when we see Hato's stand come out, named Walking Heart. And her stand ability is literally a stand that can just elongate her heels. Like, that's literally all the stand does. It just makes her heels longer so she can use them for battle. Moving on, as this goes on, Josuke is sitting there still jellified, and he starts to piece things together, and he's able to conclude that Damo must be the head of the rock humans that are smuggling the rollercoaster fruit, and that since they've already fought the 4 rock humans he mentioned previously, he must be the last rock human that's left. Hato retreats at this point, and Damo goes back to the living room trying to bring her out, and he takes the jellified and softened NORIUSKE and throws him into the chimney and goes to set it on fire, which of course baits Hato to come in as she hears her dad crying out. Damo declares his victory as he hears Hato coming, when he is suddenly impaled in the head through the roof, as it's revealed that Josuke had used his soft and wet bubbles to go inside of the wounds that Damo had and use them to signal his position to Hato, as Hato continues to use her stand/heels to continuously impale him, as Damo, who is barely alive at this point, runs out of the house. And since Damo has now run away, everyone in the household finally becomes back to normal, and there's no more jellified Higashikata household. Even NORIUSKE, who somehow got lit on fire, is just doing okay. We see Damo running outside onto the street, and if you're wondering how he took so much damage from Hato, it's because he literally is a rock human. So we see his body start to turn into rock, with Josuke, who is on a mission now. If you look at it, his face is just full of anger as he walks inside after him, and with a single blow of soft and wet, Damo is defeated. And then we see Josuke declare his identity, that he is Josefumi Kujo. But like I always say, nothing ever just goes that smoothly in a JoJo series, because on the corner of the street, we see a Toyota Prius which has JOBIN inside of it. Which, I guess losing that Lamborghini before really hit him hard, because what a downgrade that is. But we see JOBIN inside that actually saw Josuke defeat DAMO as he hangs his head in despair, seeing DAMO now being defeated. Now, turning the page in this chapter, I just want you to guess what we go to next. You can guess forever and you will not guess it, because we cut that scene and we're now in a prison called Stone Ocean. Yes, you actually heard that correctly, where we see a woman just got out of jail calling none other than JOBIN to come pick her up, revealing herself as KAATO Higashikata, who is actually NORIUSKE's ex-wife and JOBIN's mother. As if the Higashikata family just can't get any crazier at this point, we now have another member. The next day, we see Josuke head to the hospital to check on his mom, which is Holly, and we see that she is strapped to a bed and unconscious in a dusty room because, well, Kira was paying her medical bills, but now that he's dead, technically, her bills have been unpaid. So they just put her in a back and dusty room. And you thought American healthcare was bad. But because of this, Josuke has a new goal. Now that he knows his identity as Kira/Josefumi, his new goal is to find one of the LOCACACA fruits to use it to save Holly from her sickness. Also, before we continue on to the next arc, we see a small arc which is only a few chapters, which honestly, I'm gonna speedrun this because it honestly feels like a filler arc. But 2 weeks prior to KAATO's release, we see Joshu go to buy a bunch of merch for an idol because he's an idol simp, when he sees someone left their wallet on the counter and just steals it. And he even takes out a bunch of money from the guy's bank account, I guess forgetting the fact that he already lives in a super rich family. But then he just balls out buying a bunch of luxurious things. However, no matter what he spends his money on, even trying to gamble it, it just literally keeps duplicating, even leading to him trying to burn the money when that causes a bunch of money to just spawn in, almost covering him. He then goes home, he wakes up the next day on the couch and returns to his room thinking that this was all a dream, but there's even money there. So he tracks down the person he stole the wallet from, and this guy actually thanks him for taking the curse away from him, and he says he doesn't even want the wallet back, but Joshu tricks him by hiding some of the money in a bottle of juice. So then when the guy goes to open up the juice, he unknowingly tears one of the bills, transferring the curse back to him, and then Joshu is able to leave. Like I said, I have no idea the purpose of this. That honestly felt like a filler arc, but I figured I might as well just let you guys know this happened. Back at the Higashikata household, everyone's in a cheery mood, all laughing and joking now that they're back doing well after the DAMO situation, when all of a sudden, NORIUSKE looks over and sees his ex-wife just chilling in the living room. As we see that everyone's kind of confused about her since it's been so long that she's been home that even Daya doesn't recognize her, with Hato saying that this is their mother who just got back from prison. Why was she in prison, you might ask? She killed someone, but not just anyone, a child. Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit. But she says she's back to get compensated money for NORIUSKE divorcing her while she was in jail. And also, she tries to kind of rekindle her relationships with everyone, and she goes to hug Daya when Joshu kicks out a chair, causing her to fall. And then he comments on her, well, her very large assets when she's on the ground, which like, Joshu, this is your mother, by the way. But as she falls, a bunch of playing cards fall on the ground, and out of the cards, a chair appears and impales Joshu in the jaw. But apparently he's okay because we don't really see what happens with him next. But she gets mad that it seems like everyone forgot about her and doesn't love her anymore, so she storms out of the house. As JOBIN enters in and nonchalantly just kind of reveals to everyone that he's the one to let her back in the house, as NORIUSKE starts to think in his head and wonder why JOBIN would do that. Being a little bit sus about JOBIN and not being able to trust his actual son, NORIUSKE goes to speak with his new son, Josuke, about what just happened, when Josuke shows NORIUSKE that he has footage of JOBIN creeping in the garden, and he tells him that he thinks that JOBIN is involved in the LOCACACA smuggling scheme. And Josuke also tells him that he wants to find one of these fruits to not only save TSURUGI, but also to save his mother Holly, who has the same sickness. With his grandson's life being at stake, NORIUSKE tells Josuke that he knows someone that may be able to help him find this fruit. And since he works in the fruit business, he knows a really good plant appraiser that Josuke can find that can maybe source where this fruit came from, which like This probably would have been good information to give us like 30 chapters ago, but we'll take it anyways. And you would think that this is just a really good thing to follow. But again, when do things ever just go that smoothly in the JoJo series? Because KAATO was actually eavesdropping on them while she was laying on a hammock nearby, and she calls JOBIN, telling him about everything that she just heard. As we see, JOBIN is on his way driving to a garden of sorts with a bucket of fried chicken, as he starts calling out something called Rurururu, when the best way I can describe this is an actual chicken nugget looking monster thing comes up to him with no arms and no legs as JOBIN gives him the bucket of fried chicken. And this thing will probably give me nightmares, but JOBIN tells this thing that DAMO, YOTSUYA, AISHO, and the Aphex twins are all dead, and that he wants this thing now to go after Josuke. As we can see that this is also a rock human, and we also see its stand come out, which is named Blue Hawaii, which is a stand that basically can take control of any animal or person it touches, but it's also an autonomous stand which can basically just relentlessly pursue after its target until it touches it, and then it can take over its body. We then cut to Josuke when we see a courier boy come up to him trying to deliver him a letter, but as he's trying to get to Josuke, he can only go in a straight path, even if there's stuff in the way, so he just runs into a pole, and it's just basically like a direct homing missile trying to get to Josuke that can't turn or anything. And he almost starts acting feral as Josuke tries to go up and see what's happening with this boy just hitting a pole, when this boy tries to attack Josuke, and he has to use his soft and wet to try and stop him. But after Josuke steps back, the boy continues to pursue after him when a car comes down the street hitting him, as we see a letter fly out of this boy's hand, and as Josuke goes to look at it, he sees a tooth inside of it, as he notices that when this boy touched this tooth, it caused him to go feral. Josuke is able to retreat to safety, and he calls his waifu, YASUHO, for help, as she is basically one of the only people at this point that he can actually trust, but he tells her about this tooth and tells her that she needs to go to the bus station to investigate it, but to make sure that she doesn't touch it, since he saw that boy go feral when he touched it, and he's able to successfully give the letter to YASUHO, who comes to pick it up. As YASUHO goes to do that, we see that the boy basically spread this infection to multiple people, and they're now all basically zombies chasing after Josuke, when we see YASUHO use her PAISLEY Park to identify the tooth as belonging to Dolomite, which is the chicken nugget looking guy we saw before, as she tries to locate where Dolomite is at, when all of a sudden JOBIN appears and knocks her unconscious, and he doesn't kidnap her or anything, he just breaks her phone so that she can no longer contact Josuke. Since Yasuho's unable to help, at this point Josuke has everything after him. He has more people following him, and even a bird and a fly, as he runs into a store trying to find some insect repellent to kill this fly as it's getting close to him. When after successfully grabbing some repellent and killing the fly, he runs into a bathroom trying to hide from everybody. When as he's in the stall, all of a sudden a baby tries to open up the stall door and come in, as Josuke is looking at this and obviously doesn't want to hurt a baby, but it's also basically a zombie coming after him. But Josuke just can't do it, and he's unable to hurt a child, so he lets himself get touched by the baby as he becomes under the control of the Blue Hawaii stand, where he now mindlessly walks to Dolomite's pond, where Dolomite starts to interrogate him and then orders Josuke to drown himself in the pond. However, Clutch Queen YASUHO didn't just give up, as she was actually trailing Josuke, and she comes in just in the nick of time, bashing Dolomite with a metal bar, and since Dolomite has no arms or legs, he really can't defend himself, and she is able to push him into a mud pit, basically causing Dolomite to surrender as he can't move around. With Dolomite surrendering, they're now able to ask him a few questions as Josuke's no longer under his control, and Dolomite reveals to them that JOBIN is involved in the LOCACACA fruit scheme, and that it was JOBIN that ordered this hit on Josuke, successfully confirming to them at this point that JOBIN is a villain. But before they leave, Dolomite tells them to stay away from this fruit because this fruit has mutated and it's now very dangerous. And then they don't say what happens to him afterwards. I'm just gonna assume he's like stuck in this mud pit forever since he has no arms to climb out. Now, before we head to the plant appraiser, we get a quick backstory, which is actually a backstory to the Higashikata Curse, where we see KAATO playing with HATO. I know, sounds like a tongue twister, but this is back when KAATO wasn't in jail and she was actually being a mother. A young JOBIN is going off to like a Boy Scout trip as KAATO says goodbye, and he walks into the woods when this group of some older boys start picking on him and beating him up and making fun of him, as they also see in his backpack that JOBIN brought with him his mom's underwear and also a camera with pictures of her showering. They didn't really give any more explanation on that, but anyways, they continue to bully him, dragging him to a house, and they try to force JOBIN to light this house on fire. When of course JOBIN won't do that, so the main bully continues to beat him up when JOBIN touches him and his stand starts to come out, which I didn't explain it before, but his stand is called Speed King, and it can basically generate a lethal amount of heat. So when he touches the bully, well, I said it was a lethal amount, so he accidentally basically kills this boy. JOBIN goes home when KAATO, his mom, sees him crying, and well, she doesn't really ask him many questions. She literally just goes with him to help him hide the body on the Higashikata estate grounds. She starts comforting JOBIN and telling him that he didn't do anything and that she will live for his sake. And then she tells him about how she always thinks about the legend of the JOESTAR JIZOU as she takes the body near a shrine that they have on their property, in which she does a sacrifice and equivalent exchange, using the bully's body instead of her own body to take the curse out of JOBIN. Since if you remember, JOBIN is the firstborn son, and usually the Higashikata Curse would normally have the parents give their life for this, but instead of her giving her life for JOBIN, she uses the bully's body as a sacrifice. The bully's body, however, is eventually found, and using physical evidence, they traced it back to KAATO and they arrested her, and then she goes to jail and then later gets out 15 years later. Back in the present day, Josuke and YASUHO hop on a bus to go look for Rai Mamezuku, who is the plant appraiser, and they actually discuss if leaving Dolomite alone is okay, but Josuke says that he's not going to really be a nuisance anymore since, you know, he's just like a little chicken nugget stuck in mud. But they do remember how he mentioned that JOBIN was just a gopher for this fruit, and that there may be other people out there looking for it, which of course we'll get into shortly. And then if you thought it would be a bit of time before we see the plant appraiser, well, all of a sudden the bus driver just falls to the ground, and then the plant appraiser literally just hops in the bus and grabs the wheel and is like, "Hey Josuke, you need to protect me, and that driver sucked and he was taking too long, so I'm taking over," as YASUHO recognizes that this is Rai, the plant appraiser, the same person they were looking for. He tells them that their first priority is to protect him, and with the second and third priorities being both Josuke and YASUHO's lives, as he continues whipping the bus, pulling it into a parking lot as all three of them get off, as Rai says that they're being trailed by an enemy stand user, as they see a tree in the back of the parking lot get uprooted through the concrete, seeing that the enemy is now drawing closer. Josuke doesn't waste any time though and immediately starts asking him if he can find out where the fruit is from the pictures he took of the Higashikata estate on his phone, in which Rai confirms that it looks like the branch is intact, but they need to make sure that the enemy can't get a hold of it first, as he walks over to a chairlift, ushering them on as they go up on the lift. And as they're on the lift, Rai just casually makes them a whole breakfast, like eggs and pancakes and everything, which we also see him use his stand, literally named Doggy Style, which I guess a Rocky like Snoop Dogg. I think that's pretty funny, but basically his stand is that he can turn his body into like a wire or rope and either extend or snap it back, which is honestly pretty similar to Mountain Tim's stand in Steel Ball Run. He extends his body going to reach for one of the poles along the chairlift to retrieve something, but then a tree literally sneaks up on the group and hits the chair, almost knocking them off, where we see a cube-like stand that looks like a bunch of Rubik's Cube start coming toward them. And this is actually a stand named Brainstorm, and it can basically create holes in your body if it touches you. Josuke tries to use his soft and wet to get them off as they start climbing up YASUHO's leg, but after he saves her, she ends up falling off the lift onto the ground. The chair continues to move with both Josuke and Rai on it, with Yasuho trying to run to the next pole in time to climb up it and get back on the chair, when all of a sudden the ground underneath her opens up as a rock human appears, grabbing Yasuho as Josuke tries to save her with his soft and wet. Rai uses his doggy style and a knife that he had to stretch his arm, stabbing the rock human, successfully saving and freeing Yasuho as she runs to the pole to try and climb up it, when Josuke and Rai look down and see that this isn't just one rock human, but it's actually two of them combined together. Basically, one of them is like a tank and the other one can hide inside of it like a shell. So basically, every time they try and attack, he can just shield the other rock human. The chairlift continues going up the hill as they try to figure out what to do, when Josuke looks down and says that they're going after Yasuho first since she's on the ground. And even though Rai said to protect them first, I mean, Yasuho is his waifu. So Josuke jumps down from the chair, rushing towards her, trying to help, as Rai looks at this and he's not even mad about this. He actually looks at Josuke and says, wow, Josuke is a man that I can actually count on. The rock humans emerge from the ground as Josuke slams down a soft and wet attack, but for some reason his soft and wet bubbles won't go into the enemy and instead blow up behind them, causing them to have to continue running as one of them grabs Josuke's leg. But as he's being pulled down into the ground, Yasuho reaches out her hand and they look into each other's eyes. And let's be honest, they just need to kiss already, man. The tension between them is insane. But instead of doing that, she's able to pull him out of the ground with her and Josuke as they continue running from the tank Rockman. Meanwhile, Rai is still up on the lift and he swings over to another pole where the skinny Rockman is there, using the brainstorm power to cover Rai's body in cubes. Also, before someone comments this, I know the Rockman's actual name. The tank one is named Do Re Mi Fa Sol La Ti Do and the skinny one is named Urban Gorilla. But that's just too much to say every time, so I'm just going to keep using the name Tank and Skinny Rockman to make it easy. As Rai is hanging there, Skinny Rockman tells him that there is a new LOCACACA fruit that they've been cultivating and that this new fruit will bring a whole new world. But Rai is able to stretch his body out and use a fork from when he was eating breakfast earlier to stab the Skinny Rockman. But since he's stretched out, the Rockman throws it back at him, cutting his string and causing him to fall as well. Josuke sees this happen and says, I understand it now, and rushes towards the skinny Rockman with Tank Rockman following after him, as the two Rockmen then combine back together and they actually start to run over Josuke and start to pull him underground. But just in the nick of time, Rai uses his doggy style to help pass Josuke a lighter, as Josuke also uses his soft and wet to capture both fuel and fire from the lighter and slip it in between the scales of the rock humans, causing a huge explosion, blowing them both up and killing both of them. With the fight won, they're now able to relax a little bit as Rai tells Josuke that from the pictures that he showed him on his phone, he can already tell which branch on the Higashikata estate is the grafted LOCACACA branch, and that he has a way to even harvest them, as he opens up a compartment in one of the ski poles showing several vials of moth caterpillars, which he says can actually make the branch grow more fruits before the winter time, as they are able to burrow into the bundles of the branch. I don't really understand that much either myself, but just take this for what it is. Also, really quickly, we cut to a scene of JOBIN meeting up with another rock human who is actually a grown adult that looks like a baby named Poor Tom. As they say, Skinny and Tank Rockman haven't responded back to them, so they assume that they're already dead. But we see this baby looking thing named Poor Tom take out his stand, which is named Ozone Baby, and say that he's going to go after Josuke, which we'll get back to him shortly. Back to our main group, as they start to walk away, Rai pulls Yasuho aside and tells her that she should leave Josuke alone, as his emotional bond with her can become a liability. And for some reason, Yasuho just starts telling this guy a pretty emotional backstory. But backstory time for Yasuho. Back when Yasuho was 13, she brought a cute hair clip and was showing it to her mom. And we also see that her parents were divorced, so she lives only with her mom. The next day she wakes up and she sees that this hair clip is missing, and she starts crying and screaming at her mom and starts accusing her of being the one that threw out this clip, as Yasuho was set to meet her dad this day. So she thinks that her mom threw away the clip, that way Yasuho couldn't get ready and couldn't go meet her dad since, you know, they're divorced. YASUHO continues to just cry and scream at her mom, and she tries to run out the house as her dad just pulled up when her mom tries to grab her, and then we see YASUHO's skin starts to like turn into a rock as she falls to the ground and hits her head on the railing. And then we do see that the hair clip is like embedded in her hair, like down to the follicle level. She then wakes up on the couch with her dad there as he tells her that they are calling a doctor, but her dad also tells her how he has a new woman and also a child on the way, as YASUHO says that she doesn't really feel too good and she starts to walk away. But when she turns around, her dad just suddenly starts crumbling into dust and rock, and then we cut the scene and well, we see YASUHO in the bathtub with a razor, and well, I want to keep my channel monetized, so let's just say that she tried to log out of the game. She then goes to the hospital, and guess who's treating her? You guys already know by this point, it's the famous nurse of this series, Holly JOESTAR Kira, and also her son, Yoshikage Kira, who hands her this hair clip and apologizes to her, saying that he accidentally stepped on it and broke it. And then that's the end of the backstory. Honestly, I guess the takeaway from this and the reason that she told Rai about this was to say that she also wants to look for the LOCACACA fruit, and she understands the severity of the situation, but also that she's not going to be leaving Josuke. She's going to continue to help him out. We're now back at the Higashikata estate, and we now have a countdown that it's 12 days and 4 hours until the LOCACACA fruit will be ready for harvest, where we see the family doing its normal hijinks and messing around when we see JOBIN walk into a back room and remember a time that he went to the Memorial Baseball Stadium with his dad, NORIUSKE. Basically, he remembers a time that they were at the baseball game and they had a disagreement about running the Higashikata fruit parlor, as JOBIN wanted to expand it to more operations like producing olive oil and processed fruit goods, but NORIUSKE said no, they're sticking to what they know of selling flowers and just fruits. But as NORIUSKE walks away, all of a sudden YOTSUYA comes up to JOBIN, and this is when they first meet, as he says that he was actually designing the new Higashikata estate. Basically just a quick backstory showing how JOBIN got involved in all of the LOCACACA fruit trading scheme and everything like that. Josuke and Rai arrive at the Higashikata estate and go through some underground passages, and Rai tells Josuke that YASUHO went back home to investigate a hair clip she had that she assumed to be like a rock animal, which is the one we saw in her backstory. But as they go to the surface of the estate, Rai is immediately able to locate the LOCACACA branch on the tree that it's on, and announces that in 12 days, a small fruit will grow from it as he has the moths to harvest it. Now, back to JOBIN, we see that when JOBIN had met poor Tom, he buried and hid his stand, Ozone Baby, in the family orchard, which basically his stand is yet another long-range autonomous stand, but basically it has the power to manipulate air pressure, and it can be set somewhere specifically by burying a Lego house into the soil of the ground, and when it's buried, it increases its effect. Which sounds confusing, but it's JoJo's, it's just how it goes. This stand is basically a Lego house. But as JOBIN is in the garage, all of a sudden TSURUGI and Iwasuke, who is the dog who we saw from TSURUGI's arc, come up to him asking him what was that thing that he buried in the yard, as JOBIN didn't know that TSURUGI was spying on him, when all of a sudden a gas canister in the garage starts to crush under pressure, as TSURUGI also yells out that his ears are hurting, as we see Iwasuke also start to yelp and scream in pain, with JOBIN also having a nosebleed. Iwasuke tries to run outside as TSURUGI goes to chase after him, where they both fall under effect of Ozone Baby's power, falling to the ground as an immense amount of pressure comes over them, as blood also starts to come out of their mouth. Basically, JOBIN is kinda stupid, and he planted Ozone Baby on the estate grounds, but it being an autonomous stand, it can't discern friend from foe, so it just attacks everything in range, even JOBIN. And also, I just have to point this out. The joke of Araki hating dogs has to be true, because there is no other reason for Iwasuke to be in this moment, other than for him to get hurt as well. So yeah, the meme of Araki hating dogs, it just has to be true. JOBIN tries to reach out to TSURUGI, but the pressure takes over him as well as he falls to the ground, and he tries to get back inside to get away from the pressure, but being under so much pressure, he can't move, where he summons his stand Speed King to literally get in a car next to them, and I'm not joking here. His stand goes inside the car, puts it in reverse, and is able to drive the car backwards, pushing both JOBIN and TSURUGI back inside the garage, just enough to where they're able to close the door and alleviate some of the pressure that they're under, as the door can kind of act like a barrier for the pressurization. So yeah, stands can just drive cars now, I guess. TSURUGI, however, is still on the ground unable to breathe, where JOBIN takes some sodium chloride and uses his Speed King ability to heat it up, basically creating an oxygen bottle for TSURUGI to inhale and be able to breathe. Which, yes, sodium chlorate and heat equals oxygen, which I just had to point this out because that proves that even science is a JoJo's reference. JOBIN tells TSURUGI that he'll make any sacrifice that he has to make to cure the Higashikata family's curse. And so he has to get his hands on the LOCACACA fruit as he plans to draw out Josuke and the plant appraiser to gain his victory. HATO and Daya attempt to go into the garage to see what was going on, but with them opening up the door, they now also fall under the effects of the ozone baby's pressure. And as they collapse to the ground, with them having opened up the door, some of the pressure starts to leak into the room, now attacking JOBIN and TSURUGI again. And since this attack is just attacking indiscriminatively, JOBIN says that they're gonna have to kill poor Tom. And if you wonder, what is poor Tom doing during all of this? Well, Araki was being freaky again, and let's just say that there's a girl in bed and he is under the covers. That's all I'm gonna say about it. Again, I want to stay monetized. If you get it, you get it. Let's just say something about licking things, I guess. However, he receives a call from JOBIN and then he has to rush out to the room heading towards the Higashikata family estate. JOBIN decides that he needs to start accelerating things, and he sets the Higashikata orchard on fire with his stand where the LOCACACA branch is located somewhere. And he does this using TSURUGI's origami frog, which he lights on fire, which then goes to the orchard. And he even says that he knows that this is basically gambling, as he says that if the fruit gets destroyed, then basically everyone loses. But he knows that by doing this, that Josuke will have to come out to try and save the fruit, in which he plans to take him out, and then that'll also lead him to where the fruit is. Josuke and Rai are underground again, where they fall under the effect of Ozone Baby's pressure, but seeing the orchard on fire, they use Josuke's soft and wet to basically get in a huge bubble, allowing them to safely be able to step outside, as Josuke says that they can't let the branch burn. Rai steps outside first, looking through the orchard for the LOCACACA branch, but as he's walking, he suddenly stops and looks to the side, where he sees poor Tom, who also came here, holding his Lego house as the branch starts to fall to the ground, as the tree that it was on was already on fire. Rai then uses his doggy style to stretch both of his arms to both catch the branch and also restrain poor Tom. However, with poor Tom being touched by Rai, he's able to put him under an immense amount of pressure, as Josuke also steps out pursuing after him and uses his soft and wet to shoot multiple bubbles of YOU seeds at him, which are basically something that was growing in the orchard that are basically like a poisonous seed. However, it's a very slow acting poison, so although it does hit him, poor Tom is able to basically take out Rai by putting him under so much pressure that causes him to basically split apart, as his stand basically turns him into string. And also, we see poor Tom be able to take the branch from Rai since it dropped on the ground. Josuke pursues after poor Tom, but poor Tom says that he has comrades coming for him in an ambulance to help him, as we see an ambulance and firefighters arrive on the Higashikata estate with poor Tom running towards them. But Josuke is relentless in his pursuit, and he shoots a soft and wet bubble that starts tracking after poor Tom, with poor Tom so afraid for his life and that he doesn't want to die, that as a last result, after this soft and wet bubble just continues to pursue after him, he drops to the ground, canceling his Ozone Baby's pressure, and starts begging for him to spare his life. But as he falls to the ground and the bubble pops, he sees that Josuke was actually bluffing and this was just a normal bubble with nothing inside of it. Having been tricked, poor Tom makes a mad dash for the ambulance with the branch in hand, when all of a sudden a bullet or something just comes out of nowhere and just takes him out. Like literally just one shot and then he's just dead. It's almost as if like a calamity just struck poor Tom. If you don't get what I mean by that, you're gonna get that really soon. But we see somebody step out of the ambulance and just grabs the branch and then get back in and leaves, with Josuke trying to chase after it, but he's unable to outrun a car and he falls to the ground in defeat, that the branch was just taken by an unknown person in the ambulance. But I will say this again, when are things ever that simple in a JoJo story? Because this whole time it is revealed that TSURUGI had used his paper Moon King to trick everyone, and it was actually just an ordinary branch that they were fighting over, and that he had the actual LOCACACA branch that JOBIN stole during all of this, and they hide the branch and graft it into a cactus as JOBIN declares his victory. Also, whoever it was that was in the ambulance sees that this isn't the actual LOCACACA branch and assumes whoever it was that set the fire must be the person who has the real branch. And with them having the real branch, JOBIN tells TSURUGI that he must keep this a secret from everyone, even NORIUSKE, which you gotta feel bad for TSURUGI because you can tell that he's an actual good kid, but his dad, JOBIN, is just corrupting him. Also, although Ozone Baby was defeated, Rai is just on the ground, just still spaghettified, with Josuke going back to him and in tears telling him that they lost the branch. But luckily, Rai is able to slowly bring his body back together and get back to normal, but this was a defeat for them. With everyone now being okay again after defeating poor Tom, or rather him just randomly getting defeated, the Higashikata household all meet together to discuss what just happened, and even JOBIN is there. With him already being so suspicious, he's just allowed to be in this discussion, but Josuke tells him that somebody in the ambulance van took the branch, with JOBIN and TSURUGI just, keeping quiet. But Joshu actually accuses Rai of being the arsonist, but Josuke and NORIUSKE come to his defense, saying that he is just a plant appraiser and that the estate was attacked due to the LOCACACA branch being on it. And JOBIN thinks that he's really smart, I guess, and he really tries to mislead Josuke, telling him that if someone in the ambulance took it, well then he needs to focus on the hospital as the branch has to be there. But of course we know that, JOBIN actually has the branch. But after everyone leaves, Rai pulls Josuke to the side and basically tells him that, hey, I can tell that JOBIN is being really suspicious, and he tells Josuke that he thinks that JOBIN is the culprit that lit the Higashikata estate on fire. Josuke at first doesn't really believe it, since he says that JOBIN wouldn't try to burn the branch since that's what he's after, but Rai says that he can't necessarily prove it right now, but he has a really strong suspicion just by the way that JOBIN was acting that he has to be the culprit. Which I'm glad someone here can just kind of say the obvious. But although they're suspicious of him, they still think that the ambulance driver took the actual branch. So they decide to look into the hospital to hopefully get the branch back. We then see Mitsuba, who is a character that you probably forgot about at this point, but it's actually JOBIN's wife, who hasn't done anything up until now, but she actually goes to the hospital as she suddenly has a weird illness that the side of her head is turning into rock. So she goes to see her physician, which is Dr. Wu. And when she's in the examination room, he just looks at her, sees her head half turned to the rock, and then says, "Your blood work and everything looks fine, so you're perfectly healthy." And she, of course, is trying to say, "Look at my ear, it's literally rock," but he just keeps insisting that she's perfectly fine. And so he says, "Okay, if you really want, I have a one-time treatment. I don't normally recommend this, but for the one-time price of 200 million yen, which is about 1.2 million freedom dollars, he can do a very special treatment that's not legally recognized, but he knows that it can actually work on her." We then cut to also seeing YASUHO arriving at this same hospital as she was feeling some recent pains, and as she's sitting there waiting to be seen, she sees Mitsuba being taken in a wheelchair, and as she takes a closer look, she sees her legs are completely turned into rock and it's crumbling. And then we also get an update that there's only 10 days left until the harvest of the fruit is ready. Yasuho, seeing this and recognizing Mitsuba, immediately calls her lover, Josuke, telling him about what she saw, as Josuke also fills her in about what happened with the person in the ambulance taking the branch. Josuke tells her that she needs to get out of this hospital, as both him and Rai are already rushing on their way there, as they can tell that something strange is going on with this hospital, which is named TG University Hospital. And despite telling her to be, safe and everything, Yasuho continues to investigate what she saw by using her stand to research Dr. Wu, and also following Mitsuba into an examination room where she goes inside and sees that her legs now look to be perfectly normal. And Yasuho tries to ask her about what just happened, but Mitsuba really can't remember anything, where Yasuho tries to ask her where the wheelchair went that she came in with, when she opens up a drawer and can see it mangled inside of it. Yasuho again tries to call her husbando Josuke, but as she tries, the phone essentially starts to fragment into rocks, as now both her and Mitsuba become under attack from Dr. Wu's stand, which is literally a stand named Dr. Wu, which the user is actually just named Wu Tomoki, and then the stand is named Dr. Wu, but just to make it easy, I'm just gonna call him Dr. Wu in both forms. But the stand Dr. Wu can basically allow Wu to break his body into small independently controlled stones and also reconstruct himself anywhere. Josuke and Rai actually arrive at the hospital, but as they're searching for her, we see YASUHO figures it out and questions Mitsuba, saying that she must have eaten one of the LOCACACA fruits, since she saw that she's now fully healed when she saw that she was turning into a rock earlier. But again, Mitsuba just keeps saying that she can't remember anything, but YASUHO says that if she did eat the fruit, there must have been an equivalent exchange that happened, that something might be missing as a result of her eating the fruit, as we see more fragments start to creep all over YASUHO, in which, I mean, what is this shot, Araki? Honestly, Araki is just giving me a bunch of extra work to have to blur these panels out, because did we really need a shot of YASUHO like this with rock fragments going inside of her, well, underwear? Being under attack, YASUHO summons her stand Paisley Park to grab a nearby syringe and poke it into her head to extract a rock that was going towards her brain, saving her before it effectively took her out. As we see YASUHO take Mitsuba's hand to run out, as Dr. Wu starts to reassemble himself in the room, saying that he'll allow YASUHO to leave, but he can't let Mitsuba leave since he did the treatment on her. However, YASUHO and Mitsuba run out of the room when Mitsuba drops a bombshell at this moment that she hasn't told anyone, not even her husband Jobin, that she's actually pregnant at this very moment. But she reveals this to say that she feels perfectly healthy after the treatment from Dr. Wu, but she remembers that YASUHO mentioned something about an equivalent exchange, asking, well, if she feels fine, what could have gotten traded in this exchange? As we also see Mitsuba's stand start to come out of her as well. And I'll be honest, I actually think Mitsuba's stand is really cool. It's named Awakening 3 Leaves, and it's a stand that can basically manipulate vectors, changing the movement of energy to match the direction an arrow is pointing. So she can like summon an arrow, and then wherever she points that arrow, she can kind of move objects and things towards that direction. And she uses it in some pretty interesting things that we're about to see. As they continue to run in the hospital from the rock fragments going everywhere, Mitsuba uses these arrows to essentially push all the fragments around them in one direction, creating a small window of safety for them. And then she also uses an arrow to move both her and YASUHO upwards as she kicks Dr. Wu, which is actually a pretty cool and useful way to use this stand. They are able to run into an elevator, shutting the door, and with a brief moment of safety, she uses the stand to push the rocks out of her body. But not only do the rock pieces come out, but also a little arm, which, yes, if you haven't guessed it, that is the baby inside of her and part of the equivalent exchange, as both her and YASUHO look onto this in horror. However, Dr. Wu appears in the elevator after using the rock fragments to come through the ventilation shaft, and he starts spouting the normal villain stuff about how he is actually doing this for good and all of that, but both being horrified and being just super angry, Mitsuba uses her stand to push all of the fragments of Dr. Wu into one little small area, in which they're able to use some medical tape, and since he's practically just pieces of rock, they're able to essentially neutralize him by just taping him to the ground. Wanting to save her unborn baby, Mitsuba takes the tiny hands of rock that fell out of her as she asks Yasuko if she thinks that it's still alive, with Yasuho saying that she's not too sure, but Mitsuba tells her that she remembers when she was in the wheelchair seeing a room full of fruits being grown, as Dr. Wu gets back up and tries to attack them, but this part is kind of funny. They just basically beat him up, take the little pieces of rock, and then tape him into a ball now, and they run to a window outside and just toss him outside into the parking lot. Now with Dr. Wu being defeated yet again, Yasuho tells her that she thinks that if Mitsuba eats one more of these fruits, that it may heal the baby, as Mitsuba uses her stand to again push the rock pieces of the baby back inside of her in hopes of saving it as they try and rush to find this fruit. But as they're rushing, Yasuho runs by someone that she recognizes, which is a guy named Toru, who is actually her ex-boyfriend, in which they're just like, oh, hey, what are you doing here? When Yasuho says that she has to go, but she asks him to go get Josuke for her and tell him that she's on the 3rd floor so he can come and get her. With Toru, of course, being a little bit confused, but he's like, Okay, whatever, I guess. They head to the location that Mitsuba remembers seeing all the fruits being grown, where they see a wall that is actually a heavily guarded door, and they use Paisley Park to be able to open it. And they go inside and see, well, a whole laboratory growing these LOCACACA fruits. And surprisingly, no one's inside of it at this time for whatever reason. You'd think that this would be guarded, but anyways. Mitsuba, wanting to save her baby, eats one of the fruits, saying it tastes like a fig but also has a bitter taste to it. But as she eats it, once again, she starts to become very forgetful of what is going on and where she's at, as she tries to hand YASUHO something, but accidentally uses her stand, pushing YASUHO back against the wall, making a bunch of glass crash all over the place, as they see a bunch of rock particles start to form, as YASUHO is able to tell that Dr. Wu had actually had fragments of himself inside of the fruit that had traveled through the water irrigation system into the sprinklers that were being used on the fruits. So now, Dr. Wu is inside of Mitsuba and causing her to uncontrollably use her stand to push arrows everywhere, and even can begin speaking through her body, as we see him start to appear and form in her mouth. But as he speaks, he says something pretty interesting, and he reveals that the person who made this lab is actually Holly JOSTAR Kira, who is hospitalized in this hospital, but he says that she has failed in her research of the LOCACACA fruit. YASUHO, however, stretches out some surgical tape, basically being able to redirect and reflect an arrow that goes back towards Mitsuba, causing her to be knocked back and forcing Dr. Wu outside of her body, as they attempt to run out of the room, as Dr. Wu launches a bunch of rock particles towards them, when all of a sudden they get trapped in bubbles, as we turn to see Josuke has finally arrived, here to save his waifu alongside with Rei. Josuke shoots a bunch of bubbles at Dr. Wu, and then afterwards, when Dr. Wu is basically now officially subdued at this point, he says that the bubbles he shot out actually had medicinal cement mixed in them, which is cement that can basically harden to usually feel like chipped bones, but this should allow them to capture the parts of Dr. Wu and harden them together so that he can't rejoin himself, successfully and finally neutralizing Dr. Wu. Rai looks at all of the fruits that are in this laboratory, but he says that the new LOCACACA branch that was creating the new variant they have been fighting over doesn't look to be anywhere in this hospital, and that these fruits are the old variants, as he uses his doggy style to basically destroy all of the fruits as they all leave this room. Yasuo, however, tells him that Dr. Wu was actually looking for the branch, and he actually planned to take over Mitsuba's body to investigate the Higashikata household, so that must mean that he already was suspicious that somebody in the household might have the actual branch. However, this causes everyone to piece together that someone must have switched the branches, as they thought that the branch was in the hospital and that Dr. Wu had taken it, but since they have confirmation that he doesn't have it and he actually wanted to go to the Higashikata house, well, then that means that there's someone at the house that might be worth investigating. But also, as this goes on, we see Mitsuba take an effect of the equivalent exchange as her nose begins to turn into stone. They leave this facility and they use Yasuho's Paisley Park to look into the records of who has accessed this room, seeing only 4 people have been there recently, one being Dr. Wu, Poor Tom, and Urban Gorilla, who is Skinny Rock Man, but also the hospital head director, named Satoru Akefu. However, mysteriously, they're unable to find any photo of him, and with the 3 rockmen being dead, they decide to look for this hospital director as their next lead as to where this branch might be. However, this actually causes an argument amongst the group, as Yasuho says that the branch must be at the Higashikata estate, with Rai saying someone else took it, so it has to be at the hospital, with Yasuho looking at Josuke like, yo, back me up here please. But Rai continues to press Yasuho, saying that she's lying and he doesn't even believe her hair clip story, and basically that whole sad story that she gave him was all a hallucination, and then says that he doesn't have time for this and that the new branch has to be in the hospital, so they need to get out of there and they don't want her involved anymore. Josuke looks at Yasuho and is like, well, I want to back you up, but honestly, it's just unrealistic that Jobin has the branch, since the fire was going on and the whole family was inside the house, so there's no way that Jobin would be able to have the branch. And this mysterious docket is the best lead they have to see even if Jobin would be the culprit, since he has to be connected to this doctor and all of the rock humans. So if they investigate the head doctor, if Jobin really is involved, he'll eventually become involved in this somehow, as Josuke and Rai get into the Lamborghini they had from before and they just leave YASUHO behind. With her obviously being in shock about this and obviously being in shock that Josuke didn't take her side, when all of a sudden though, a little K-van pulls up with Toru, Yasuho's old ex, here for her just in the moment of her being sad about her new husbando not taking her side. With Toru having seen her with Josuke, asked if they were going out together, with Yasuho saying no, but well, she just doesn't want to talk about it right now. As Toru grabs her hand and says how whenever he reaches his hand out, her hands instinctively hold it as their fingers start to interlock. And luckily Yasuho swipes her hand away. But before he leaves, Toru says that he hopes to see Yasuho again, as Josuke looks on over his shoulder, with Rai asking who is that guy over there with Yasuho, with Josuke saying that that's her ex-boyfriend. And Rai is like, ah, so you've both done it with Yasuho, huh? And Josuke, well, he doesn't confirm it, but, well, he also doesn't deny it, to be honest, but Rai is like, anyways, this guy showing up all of a sudden is kinda sus, and so maybe we should keep an eye on him as well, referring to Toru. We then cut to the Higashikata residence, where we see a quick scene where Joshu plays a prank on Hato by detaching his tongue using Nut King Call and throwing it at Hato. And of course she accuses him of throwing it, but Joshu plays dumb. However, when Daya sends Tsurugi to look for NORIUSKE, Tsurugi accidentally steps on Joshu's tongue, causing him to bend over in pain and proving his guilt that he's the one that threw that tongue at her. Basically, the point of this is that there's some narration about how stands remain a private topic even among family, but there's a time when hidden feelings of the heart will inevitably come out. But then all of a sudden, we cut all the way to it only being 13 minutes until the LOCACACA branch is ready for harvest. And I hate to do this, but really quickly, a quick disclaimer. As we get into this last arc, so much stuff is going to happen. We're going to be looking at the hospital, we're going to be looking at the Higashikata house, and also having flashbacks integrated into that. So it sometimes gets a little bit hard to follow. I'm going to do my best to group chapters together to keep everything as one cohesive story, but I just hope that you guys follow along well. But I say that to say that if you maybe have already read Jojolion and if you think I'm leaving out something, just give it some time. I'm going to try my best to kind of rearrange this to make it a lot more easier to understand. With now only 13 minutes until the LOCACACA branch is ready for harvest, we see Tsurugi go into the office room, the same one that Josuke was told not to go into at the very start of the story, where we see him start to drag a body bag with a bloody NORIUSKE inside that's also missing an arm, as a paper frog from Tsurugi's stand hops outside. And I know, you probably have a lot of questions about how did we get here? Well, before we can see that, we now cut all the way back to 7 days prior to this so we can uncover what just happened to NORIUSKE. We see a scene to where Mitsuba arrives in front of Tsurugi's school to take him back home after a school trip, where a teacher sees her missing nose and is a little disturbed, but Mitsuba tells her that she's fine and just to not worry about it. But the teacher then tells her about an incident where during the trip, Tsurugi was being teased by a group of girls where they were teasing him about the murder that they heard that KAATO, his grandmother, did. When all of a sudden a frog jumps on the bullies, one of them named Mina, with that causing her to fall into some water. And Mitsuba hears this and is like, what's the point of you telling me this? Tsurugi did nothing wrong. When all of a sudden, one of the bullies runs up to the teacher and is crying, saying that they need to call an ambulance, where at the entrance, Mina's body is found having been crushed in the gates of the school, with Mina's mother saying that with the gates being so heavy, someone must have pushed them on her daughter as she screams out. When a student then points at Tsurugi, saying that Tsurugi was the one that made the gates move, with everyone now pointing their attention at both Tsurugi and Mitsuba. But before seeing what happens there, we get another time jump, and we're now at 6 days until the harvest, so one day after that happened, where Josuke, Rai, and Yasuho start their search for the mysterious hospital director, the supposed last member of the LOCACACA organization. And although she does tag along, Yasuho is still certain that the LOCACACA is at the Higashikata residence, but she kind of has no choice but to, of course, just kind of follow Josuke and Rai at this moment. Now, how do you find the director of a hospital, you might ask? You just go up to the front desk and ask them, of course, with them, of course, saying, well, you need an appointment for him and he's completely booked right now. As Rai tries to press the receptionist about how they can't even find an image of this hospital director, but they desperately need to see him. When all of a sudden, you guessed it, the hospital director Satoru just walks past them all casually, walking down the hall as they try to yell out for him, as Yasuho pulls out her phone, quickly snapping a picture of him before he walks away. They chase after Satoru, heading down a long staircase where we see a stand looms over Josuke, with Josuke using his soft and wet to try and attack it, but it suddenly disappears. As they continue to try and chase after the director, with him now entering onto a hospital floor. And as they chase after him and they exit the door as well, all of a sudden a patient on a cart runs into them as they're being transported in the hospital. And you won't guess who's wheeling the cart. It's the medical assistant, Toru, running into Yasuho once again. As the kid on the stretcher starts to choke, Toru has Yasuho help him by holding the kid as he uses a tube to suck out a large piece of food, successfully saving the kid's life. But as they had this shared moment, Toru looks at Yasuho, holding her close, and they look into each other's eyes, saying that they ran into each other at just the perfect time. And if you're wondering, yes, Josuke is down the hall and he turns around seeing this, saying that it looks like Toru ran into them on purpose, and he actually tells Toru and accuses him of interfering with their group, saying that he's stopping them from trying to find the hospital director. However, Toru responds by saying, how can I be interfering with you guys finding him if he's literally right there? As they turn around and see the hospital director just at the end of this hall, just sitting down. As he gets up and starts to walk away, they attempt to chase after him when all of a sudden, a glass door suddenly closes on them, but as they try and open and continue to pursue him, all of a sudden now they start to trip over a bunch of chairs. Basically, as they try and follow the hospital director, bad things just kind of keep happening, stopping them. Almost like a calamity is happening. They continue to give chase after him, and Yasuho at this moment just has to clear the air, telling Josuke that nothing is between her and Toru, and he doesn't mean anything to her anymore, with Josuke like, okay, Yasuho, I got it. Can we just find this branch, because that's kind of more important than that right now. Satoru continues to invade the group and they head outside the hospital as Josuke, who has Yasuho's phone for some reason, sees an incoming call from Toru pop up, and he tries to hand it to Yasuho, but before he can, he sees that Toru already left a voicemail, in which he listens to it, and basically Toru is kind of, I guess, flirting with Yasuho, saying he knows that she feels for him and that he is actually in love with her. And then he sends her a picture saying that they should meet when he's off work at the place that they first met, sending her a picture of them on the beach together, with Josuke just kind of looking at this. And you gotta admit, that's pretty tough thing for him to see about his waifu. But anyways, all of a sudden, as they're standing there though, Rai's legs basically become shredded as they realize that they are under attack by a stand, with Yasuho and Josuke continuing to try and chase after the director, who has now boarded a bus. But as they run after it, a car almost runs into them, but just narrowly Josuke uses his soft and wet to get them both out of the way. But by this point, the bus already drove off, so they have to abandon their chase for now. Now, things are about to get quite insane right here, so just follow along with me. As they are giving up their chase, a patient then comes out of the hospital going up to Josuke, and it's just being really crazy, yelling at Josuke for no reason when he tries to attack Josuke. But as Josuke goes to defend himself, this guy's neck just literally falls off, like his head just falls to the ground. And this of course causes a whole scene with everybody outside looking at this and calling the cops. As they see the cops coming, Rai tells Yasuho basically, hey, this is not good. This is going to cause a whole scene. We got to split up. We can't all get caught together. And he tells Yasuho that they have to leave immediately, as both Rai and Josuke run off together, leaving Yasuho just behind and just standing there by herself. And in her time of loneliness, guess who comes up to her? Yes, it's Toru again. But he says he saw what happened, and he saw that Josuke did nothing to the guy, and he'll even testify to this. But what he's worried the most about is Yasuho, as he puts his arm around her and she thanks him. And yeah, if you can't tell, I do not like this guy taking Yasuho away from Josuke, but man, does this make a good love triangle. It's just so interesting to read. I feel the same as I did when I watched Domestic Girlfriend. It's just a dumpster fire I just can't look away from. Josuke and Rai continue to run from the police, and they're actually able to avoid the police by hiding in Josuke's Lamborghini, which they actually put into a tree somehow. I have no idea how, but the Lamborghini is just up in a tree. But as they have a moment of safety, they try and theorize about Satoru's stand, but they can't really piece together what it is. They do, however, have a newspaper they got along the way, and in the newspaper they see that Satoru is set to attend a lecture at the hospital memorial hall tomorrow, and they decide that they plan to ambush him during this to find out his true identity. As they plan to now head out of the car, once again, that mysterious stand from before looms over Josuke, with him trying to hit it once again, but it disappears. But this causes both of them to fall out of the tree, with Rai saying even he saw it too, as they start to piece together that it seems like whenever they have the intent of pursuing after Satoru, this stand appears but then goes away. They see a police car nearby and they try and run away when all of a sudden it starts raining. But these raindrops are basically like lethal and they pierce right through Rai's hand as Josuke tries to punch the raindrops and they use his soft and wet to make bubbles to shield them. But as the rain continues, they are forced to run to the nearest cover, which is actually the inside of the police car. Realizing that they're cornered at this point, I mean, there's deadly rain outside and now they had to take cover in the inside of a police car and they're going to get arrested. Josuke tells Rai that he wants to find the LOCACACA fruit to find out his true identity, as he knows that he's a blend of two people, but he wants proof of his true existence. And then Josuke has a sudden plan that he enacts. He then steps out of the police car, letting himself be hit by the raindrops as a way to make sure that he is going to be transported back to the hospital, as Rai is left behind in the police car and he's obviously shocked about this, but being left there, he's now arrested by the police as the police call an ambulance to take Josuke back to the hospital. We then cut to Toru and Yasuho, shaking my head. But they're sitting there together reminiscing basically about some incident where Yasuho helped him in the past about an invention, but then Toru switches and is like, Yasuho, let's get back together. And he starts like trying to flirt with her and rizz her up, and he leans in for a kiss. But in the nick of time before that happens, Yasuho suddenly gets a notification on her phone as she gets up running away, seeing Paisley Park notified her that it was able to find out where Rai had went. Essentially, since she was left behind, she started to track both Josuke and Rai with her Paisley Park, with it just finally picking up a signal on where they're at. Toru, however, walks up to her and says that he knows that they're looking for the head doctor and says that he can actually help her find this information, and then he grabs her phone and finds a photo of Satoru, the head doctor, with Mitsuba in the background, as Yasuho sees this and is confused why they're in a picture together. And then we see that it starts to suddenly rain, where we get an update that now it's only 2 days until the LOCACACA branch is ready for harvest. But before we see what happens then, we're going to jump back in time. I gave you guys that disclosure that I'm going to try and piece things together, because we're now back at the mark of 6 days until the harvest, where we pick up right where we left off with the whole gate incident with Mitsuba and Tsuragi. Mitsuba meets with the Parents Association at the school about the incident regarding Tsuragi and the whole gate, and she gets into an argument and is basically crashing out, arguing with one of the mothers whose name is Mako, who will come up again shortly. But as they all review the cameras on what happened, Mitsuba in the video footage sees for some reason Satoru, the hospital director, being near the gates when this happened. It doesn't really show anything about Tsuragi closing the gate, so they end up going home, where Mitsuba tries to talk to her husband Jobin about what happened, but he just like doesn't really respond to that, and he starts yapping about the strength of the Higashikata household, which confuses Mitsuba, as she turns around and then she sees Satoru at the edge of the Higashikata estate grounds, and she tries to open a window to get a better look when her nail breaks on the window frame, which causes her to lose sight of the director as he walks away. She then goes back to Jobin to ask for a band-aid, where she catches a glimpse of the LOCACACA tree hidden among a cacti that Jobin grafted it into, in which Jobin is just kind of unconcerned about this, but he also is just kind of feeling a little bit sus about his wife. Now, we see another thing had happened, where we see Mako, who is the person arguing with Mitsuba, meet with her boyfriend, and you won't guess who it is. It's Ojiro. Yes, the same Ojiro who I told you to just remember. As she starts ranting to him about what happened with Mitsuba, and she's kind of jealous of her, saying that she has a dream of acquiring the Higashikata's precious land. But she said that she also has heard rumors about this land and the fact that it has healing soil around the residence. This kind of intrigues Ojiro, and he decides to pay the Higashikata household a visit, and as he goes there, he's stalking the household where he confronts Tsurugi. And he tells Tsurugi that he already knows about the LOCACACA fruit, and he's actually been investigating it, and he's already found out that Jobin is involved in the LOCACACA fruit organization. Tsurugi, of course, is scared about this, and he runs back inside, with Ojiro actually letting him, in which Tsurugi runs and goes and tells Jobin. With Jobin hearing about Ojiro being here, he goes to check on the LOCACACA branch to make sure it's not stolen. But then he's able to see that Tsurugi's hand is under the effect of fun, and that Tsurugi actually has been holding a phone and has unknowingly leaked the LOCACACA's location to Ojiro, who is up on top of the roof of the house now. Ojiro uses his stand to control Tsurugi and push him into a window, shattering the glass, and that baits Jobin to reach out for his son, but in the process, he gets cut on the glass, causing his arm now also to have the mark of fun. With both Tsurugi and Jobin basically being under his control, Jobin realizes that he really can't do anything to combat this, and so being cornered, he actually just gives up. And he tells Ojiro that he can just go ahead and take the fruit, with Ojiro kind of being smart about it, telling them both to show their stands, as he swats away Paper Moon King, but when he sees Jobin's stand, Speed King, come out, he basically looks at this and is like, yeah, that thing is pretty powerful, I know I can't beat that thing, and so he forces Jobin's arm to close a window on both his and Tsurugi's neck, impaling them both with glass shards. Having taken them both out, he not only takes the fruit, but he also robs Jobin of some money he had for some reason, and he takes the fruit all the way back to his girlfriend Mako. But when are things ever that smooth in a JoJo series? He suddenly realizes that he's been affected by Speed King's power, as he starts to bubble up and then he suddenly collapses to the ground, dying from heat boiling up on him, as Tsurugi has once again tricked everybody, as he made Ojiro think that both him and Jobin were dead and that he successfully got the fruit, but none of that was true. As Jobin goes to get the actual fruit, he also places a call to Mako, and as she goes to answer it, she also becomes under the effect of Speed King, and she starts to heat up, and then she dies as well, successfully assassinating both Ojiro and Mako. As this is going on, we see in the Higashikata household that NORIUSKE is reading the newspaper, and he sees an article that both Josuke and Rai are suspected of murder, and he starts to become a little bit worried. Mitsuba also reads this newspaper, and she's also a little bit worried about how something seems weird about Josuke and Rai being arrested, but also she suddenly sees the hospital director again suspiciously lurking near their house, at the same time that she's also cutting food, where all of a sudden she suddenly slices her finger, and then also spills boiling water all over the place. And then not only that, all of a sudden we see Tsurugi walk in, collapsing to the ground, as the rock disease basically has gone out of control, as we see Paper Moon King reacting to this and basically turns half of his body into giant origami, as she rushes to all of the Higashikata family members with him in hand, yelling for help. Keep all of that in mind for a little bit. We're going to leave the Higashikata estate and go right back to the hospital at the point we left off, into where we saw YASUHO with Toru, seeing the picture of both the hospital director and Mitsuba. YASUHO uses her Paisley Park on this picture of Satoru to learn more information on him, but since she saw Mitsuba in the picture, she actually asked Toru if he can do her a favor and drive her to the Higashikata estate so she can talk to her. As she's leaving to go do that, we go inside the hospital to 2 days after Josuke being hospitalized, where Josuke finally wakes up with a police officer in the room checking on him, seeing that he's now awake, when Josuke uses his soft and wet to basically knock him out and subdue him. But as that happens, the police officer's body just like falls really hard on Josuke, causing a lot of damage to him. Josuke crawls out of the hospital bed, bleeding severely, saying that he needs to get to Satoru as he knows that he's somewhere in this hospital. But as he tries to reach for some medicine, he knocks the medicine cart all over himself. And I've said this a million times this video, you won't guess who comes to help him. Well, he's in the hospital, and there's a famous nurse of this part. Yes, Holly Joestar Kira comes to his rescue, and as she's coming to him, she's talking to him, referring to him as Kira, saying that she used to treat him when he was a little boy playing and would get hurt, so she can treat him again now. But we also see that something's a little bit off about her because she has a bunch of markings on her face that look like kind of like a stopwatch, like it's a bunch of numbers like a clock. She dragged Josuke's body towards the gynecology department, which is the room where she was receiving the LOCACACA treatment, and she explains that her condition has worsened and that there's also a massive rock moving through her body that basically puts her into a coma regularly. She also explains that the LOCACACA research organization has infiltrated the hospital for a long time, and they've been performing clinical trials through DAMO's smuggling ring. As we get a better look at her, however, we see more marks on her body as we see that this is actually a way of telling time until she is going to go into another coma. But since she is taking the LOCACACA fruit, this causes memory loss, which is similar to like when we saw Mitsuba from before, forgetting things when she was talking to YASUHO. So she wrote down things like, don't trust Dr. Wu, and you're losing your memory, and your son's name is Yoshikage, and important things like that that she knows. We then cut to see that this is actually the day of the presentation, to where we see Satoru on stage giving his presentation, where he unveils a test tube that says LOCACACA 6251. And he unveils it to the crowd and explains it to everybody, telling them that this is a miracle medicine and that all somebody has to do is basically ingest this into their body under proper conditions, and then they will be magically healed without any need for surgery. Even things like broken bones or even damaged brain tissue can be healed with this new medicine, and that this will go beyond regeneration. It will bring an exchange for sound health. We then see Holly in the room break open a wall where she reaches and takes out some of the LOCACACA 6251 in a vial, and she hands that to Josuke, telling him to take this orally, and that when he does, some parts of him will turn into stone, but he's going to be healed, as this is the only way that he can be fully healed at this moment since his wounds are pretty severe. Holly feels that her time is up as she feels that she's about to fall back into a coma, but before she passes out, she tells Josuke to not go after the head doctor no matter what, and to try not to get close to him. But Josuke, of course, says that he can't quit right now and that he's going to defeat him somehow, as he takes the LOCACACA 6251 in his mouth. At the same time that happens, Holly falls into a coma, with Josuke looking over her in tears, thinking about how she was referring to him as Yoshikage Kira, and also just questioning who he is. But he declares that his name is Josuke Higashikata, but he is also certain that he is her son, calling her mom for the first time, as we also get a shot to see that his wounds are now fully healed. However, on his face, we also see small portions of his skin turning into rock, appearing from his face all the way down to his stomach, as he says that he is now going to find this new LOCACACA variant to save Holly. We then see Josuke basically revise his plan, and he says that he's not going to pursue the hospital director head on anymore. And then he has a delivery guy come to his room where he gives him an unknown package, paying him in cash, and he tells him to deliver it somewhere. Where we see Josuke saying that he knows that he can't directly pursue Satoru, but he can make Satoru instead pursue him. We then see Satoru get a visit from a journalist who has actually received the package from Josuke, and in the package there is an SD card and a jar that contains the LOCACACA fruit. And this is actually basically an SD card that has a bunch of evidence that Josuke gathered, showing proof that the hospital has been conducting illegal clinical trials on Holly Joestar Kira. But as the journalist tries to press him and question him about all this evidence, Satoru gets up and walks out of the room, and the guy's neck just seems to turn into rock and snap as he falls to the ground and Satoru walks out. As this was going on, we cut to the police station where Rai was taken when he was arrested, And we see that his cellmate that he's in the cell with actually had snuck in a smartphone with him. And as Rai is talking to the cellmate, he tells him that he knows that if he tries to leave this cell, that bad things will happen. And this causes Rai to kind of start piercing things together, noticing how Satoru has always had his back turned towards him every time that they've saw him. And he says that it feels like he's been following him around and haunting him. And that if he tries to do things like stand up to look outside to get a better look at him, as Satoru is actually outside of the cell at this moment, well, as he does that, a light bulb above them suddenly bursts, raining glass shards down. But this causes him to notice that whenever he tries to pursue after Satoru in any way, shape, or form, calamities will keep colliding into him. Rai looks through this guy's phone, saying that he found a photo of a bus stop and also a bloody knife in it. And this guy basically gets enraged at this and pulls out a knife that he also smuggled in, yelling at Rai to shut up and trying to attack him. And well, we just cut to this guy having been stabbed in the corner as the police rush in to take him to the hospital, and Rai uses his doggy style to basically hide up this guy's sleeve after he stretches himself out. That way he can now also be transported to the hospital. Having successfully made it back to the hospital now, Rai heads in looking for Josuke as he also sees Satoru heading inside the hospital doing the same. Rai is able to locate Josuke, and after running into the room, he tells Josuke that he has figured it out. He figured out that Satoru is not the stand user, he is actually the stand. And Josuke says that, well, anyways, he's gonna beat this stand and he actually knows a way to do it. And as he says that, we see not Satoru, but a stand start to emerge from the wall, where for the first time, we see the stand Wonder of You. Okay, I'm gonna pause you guys one more time really quickly because just look at how long this video has been going for so far. And just know that I am reading on chapter 98 out of 110. And we just now, for the first time, got the reveal of the main villain stand of this part. We don't even know the stand user yet. We'll get to that shortly, but literally, we're at the end of this series, and we have just now finally seen our main enemy stand. Yeah, man, this series is a lot, but let's just continue on. To explain it to you simply, Wonder of You's ability is basically if you follow after him or if you pursue him, a calamity will pursue you. And it's just kind of broken because, as we've seen, calamity just means anything and everything can basically just stop you from pursuing him. We then see Rai tell Josuke that if they move right now, they will face an attack of a power of calamity. But Josuke points his finger saying that he has the power of soft and wet soap bubbles. And this power exists under heaven and earth. Supple and moist they spin, and he also has some things on his side to aid him. He has Rai with him, and he also knows that Yasuho is out there too. So there has to be a way to beat Wonder of You, as we then see Wonder of You start to approach them. But then we cut to a shot of Toru saying that something must be happening in the lab. Just remember that point in the hospital where we leave off, because I'm now going to cut to see what was happening at the Higashikata household, as this household and the hospital will start to link up together into one timeline. Yasuho has arrived at the Higashikata estate, and she starts to use her Paisley Park to jump between different electronic devices to look for Mitsuba, where as she's looking, she ends up finding a bedridden Tsurugi, and she goes to try and ask him about the branch, when JOBIN walks in and grabs the phone that Yasuho was using her Paisley Park in and just throws it in the toilet. And since this stand is linked to Yasuho, it causes her and her stand to start drowning. She tries to run away yelling for help, where she finds a security camera on the estate grounds, and she starts looking into it, asking and begging for someone to help her. In the household, Mitsuba just happens to be walking by the security room, seeing Yasuho on the screen. Mitsuba runs to her son's room where she sees Tsurugi, who is still have origamified, and also JOBIN. And then she looks to the right and also sees a phone in the toilet, hearing Paisley Park asking and begging for help. And JOBIN just looks at her and is like, shh, just don't worry about that. But Mitsuba is trying to tell him that Yasuho is on their side, and Yasuho even saved her at the hospital, so they have to rescue her. Paisley Park / Yasuho continue to try and yell out for help, but out of the window, Mitsuba sees Satoru. Which, quick side note, this is taking place a little bit before where we left off in the hospital, so we now know that this is Wonder of You. But going forward, I'm just going to simply refer to him as Wonder of You. Seeing Wonder of You on the property, she doesn't want to to risk her son's life. So Mitsuba decides not to help Yasuho, and she just walks over and closes the toilet lid to not intervene any further, as Yasuho cries out and is almost just completely drowned at this point. Yasuho outside sees Wonder of You as well, and at this point her body is almost breaking up into like little rock pieces, having been separated from her stand. And as she's crying for help, she falls off of a ledge, causing her arm to literally come off as she screams out, asking and begging for Josuke to come and save her. Back inside the bathroom, Mitsuba tells Jobin about what happened at the hospital, and then she opens up the toilet lid and uses her stand to push an arrow to make Paisley Park go even further down the drain. But instead of it going into the toilet, suddenly the arrow shoots in the opposite direction, hitting the wall. As she says, it seems like misfortune just keeps crashing into her. Hearing all of this noise, Joshu, Hato, Daya, and NORIUSKE go to see what happened, where they walk into the room and they see a hole in the wall, and well, lucky them, they see the LOCACACA branch having fallen out of the wall, revealing Jobin's hidden location of the LOCACACA branch grafted into the cactus. NORIUSKE rushes into the room asking what's going on when he hears Paisley Park calling out from the toilet. And as he opens it, just in the nick of time, he hears Yasuho crying out and pulls the phone out of the bowl, saving Yasuho. NORIUSKE just starts yelling at Jobin, asking what is going on, with Jobin just saying, "Dad, I hope you understand, but very soon the Higashikata family will win, and this is the right path that they have to take to cure Tsurugi's illness and stop the Higashikata family curse." Yasuho, through the phone, asks NORIUSKE to bring her near a computer so she can better connect to her body, where we see outside that she is still turning into rock and she's almost disintegrating, still seeing Wonder of You nearby. Jobin tries to convince NORIUSKE to finish off Yasuho and throw the phone back into the toilet bowl, but NORIUSKE asks about the elephant of the room of, you know, the LOCACACA branch right next to them, with Jobin confirming that he has had the real LOCACACA branch this entire time, and he had it ever since the fire incident on the Higashikata estate grounds. NORIUSKE listens to this and says that if he thinks that he can break the Higashikata curse, then he'll listen to Jobin, but he says that first, he senses a smell on the flower part that has a LOCACACA branch, and NORIUSKE summons his stand to trace the smell, as we see his stand also track the form of who has grabbed this flower pot, seeing it take the form of Ojiro, showing NORIUSKE that Jobin must be connected to Ojiro's death, since NORIUSKE saw his obituary in the newspaper from before. So now seeing that Ojiro had possession of this flower pot, this must mean that Jobin killed him and is still hiding things from the family. NORIUSKE starts to press Jobin about what he did and what he did to Ojiro, when Jobin, realizing he's kinda cooked at this point, summons his stand and with tears in his eyes, touches his dad, saying to forgive him, as heat bubbles rise up NORIUSKE's skin, inducing a heat stroke in NORIUSKE as he collapses to the ground. Jobin holds onto his dad's body, crying out for what he just did, as the whole family looks on in horror, seeing Jobin just basically kill NORIUSKE. And as they all rush in, Jobin swipes at them with his stand, saying to shut their mouths and that he is doing this for the sake of the Higashikata family to move them towards the right path. However, when all this happened and when NORIUSKE fell to the ground, the phone that Yasuho was in flew out of his hand, going towards a wall near a wall socket, allowing Paisley Park to now connect back with Yasuho, saving her just in time for her to rejoin with her stand and not fully break apart. She now uses her phone and Paisley Park to try and call out for help, calling both Josuke and Rai, but when they don't pick up, she's forced to call the only other person she knows for help. Yes, she calls Toru for help, where she calls him and he picks up and she's crying, begging for help, as we see Toru, who is answering the call, and he looks very unconcerned, just saying, "Alright, I got it, I'll be there," but obviously just not really caring about what she's saying. We then see Jobin tell the family about the new LOCACACA fruit and that no one else knows about this, and they must protect this fruit from their enemies, those enemies being of both Josuke and Yasuho, as they are still obviously very in shock about what just happened, as Jobin tells Daya, Hato, and Joshu to go and carry NORIUSKE's body out of the room and take him to the second floor, and also to put the LOCACACA in another hiding spot. However, as they do that, Mitsuba suddenly sees Wonder of You appear in the room and keeps approaching them in very impossible ways, like going from a corridor to her computer screen, then passing across the bathroom and then under the bed sheets. He just kind of keeps appearing all over the place as they're trying to look at where he's coming from. Mitsuba warns JOBIN about this, and she warns him about Wonder of You, and also realizing about Wonder of You's ability, she tells JOBIN to not go after him. However, JOBIN has already summoned his Speed King, and he tries to attack Wonder of You as it passes under the bed sheets. And as he does that, Wonder of You just seemingly disappears. JOBIN, realizing that Wonder of You is after the LOCACACA branch, tries to take it outside of the room when calamity happens, as he suddenly gets a nosebleed, and out of nowhere, a small metal rod from a can of hairspray has suddenly shot into his chest, piercing him, causing him to start leaking blood profusely as he falls to the ground, yelling out for both TSURUGI and Mitsuba, trying to reach out for the fruit he sees on the ground, but with so much blood loss, JOBIN actually bleeds out and, well, he's gone. The LOCACACA fruit then rolls towards the garage, where we see that Toru has arrived on the property, but instead of going to save YASUHO, he just kind of overlooks all of this happening, and he puts in some earbuds and he turns on Ozzy Osbourne's Crazy Train on his iPod, where we also see the famous panel of Toru that you've already probably seen online as he changes the song to Elvis Presley's The Wonder of You. YASUHO is still crying out for pain as Toru says that this was the right path that JOBIN was talking about, but it is unavoidable that bad things will just sometimes occur, and that is calamity, and that the new LOCACACA fruit is just on the other side of the garage and that he can go and take it. And it's at this point that we finally get the reveal that Toru is the main villain and he is the stand user of Wonder of You. So yeah, we're at basically the last 10 chapters of this manga, and we have got the reveal of the main villain and his stand. I don't have much else to say about that, but we are now linked up as to what is happening at the hospital and what is happening at the house. And this now leads us to the final battle against the main villain of Toru. And it's going to get really crazy and sometimes hard to follow, but I'm going to do my best to explain it. Just stick with me here. In the hospital, Wonder of You emerges from the wall and asks which one of them will be the first one to pursue him, as pursuing him leads to disaster. And he says that the point on a journey where you're most likely to meet with an accident is just before returning home, and that he says that Josuke and Rai are at the end of their long journey to find this LOCACACA fruit, as he touches the floor and he brings out a rock insect named Dododo di Dadada, who I will just refer to as the insect because I am not going to keep repeating that, but this insect emerges from the floor and attacks Josuke. We then cut to a backstory explaining what exactly are these rock humans and insects. It says that rock human females are visually indistinguishable from normal human women, and it's possible for a human male to reproduce with a rock woman, but rock men can't reproduce with human women. It then explains that rock female mothers give birth in the spring and summer, but they rarely have any relationship with their children, as once they're born, they take the child into a forest, find roots of a dead tree, and just leave the baby there with nothing to protect them, but to them that's considered an act of love. As the baby is there defenseless, they are often approached by insects, and the same way that they would cling to their mothers, they instead cling onto hornets, and as they fly away, their skin starts to turn into stone, being brought back to the hive, where they essentially take over by hiding inside of the queen hornet's body, which is how they find a warm and safe place to sleep, where they stay there for 17 years as the queen undergoes metamorphosis. The rock baby then grows bigger and it kills all of the wasps, and then they venture out into the world. And then it also explains that rock humans are sort of an insurance policy for the world, as sort of a fallback in case normal life were to cease to exist. We also see a scene in this of the Steel Ball Run race, seeing Lucy Steel at the Devil's Palm, and then also her in Morio with the Speedwagon Foundation. We then cut to another flashback, this time of Rai at his father's funeral, where he is approached by a younger NORIUSKE who came to pay his respects as well, where Rai Rai tells NORIUSKE that he saw an insect on his father's orchard that destroyed all of their crops, and as his father went to check out on the crops during a typhoon, he died in a landslide. Which NORIUSKE says that that couldn't be possible, as we notice that a man is leaving the funeral who we can actually see is Satoru, and we later learn that this insect is actually the rock insect that they're fighting. Cutting back to the hospital, the insect launches another attack as Josuke goes to use his soft and wet to defend himself, but all of a sudden a strange substance starts to leak from his eyes and ears as he falls to the ground. And then a wood piece starts to shoot towards him, but Rai uses his doggy style to narrowly protect Josuke, telling Josuke that he has been poisoned and that he can't move or else the poison will spread. Wonder of You starts to taunt Rai and tells him that he remembers his father's death, mentioning both the land they owned as well as how he was caught in the flow of calamity, hinting that he is responsible for Rai's father's death, but of course not expressly saying it. Rai, having blocked the attack, also gets poisoned as the insect launches another attack and Josuke is forced to stand up to block it, and he uses his soft and wet to try and attack the insect, which is inside of the desk that's under him, but as he moves so much, the poison continues to cripple him, clogging up his airways so that Josuke can't breathe. Rai tells Josuke not to move as he unravels himself and he crawls on the ceiling almost like Spider-Man, taking the insect by surprise and stabbing it with his fingertip, saving both him and Josuke from the poison, as Rai also figures out something. Since he wasn't aiming for Wonder of You but rather the insect, when he pierced it with his stand actually got only within a few centimeters from Wonder of You, showing that it might be possible to actually hit him. Rai pressures Wonder of You, saying he is now only a centimeter from his face, where Wonder of You taunts Rai about his family and he tries to make him attack him, as Rai launches forward, grabbing his throat, yelling out at him to die, shooting his finger at him, where it narrowly misses Wonder of You, hitting a wall, as suddenly Rai's shoulders and arms get affected by Josuke's soap bubbles. Before this happened, Josuke had actually set several traps within this room of hidden bubbles that were spinning at a high speed, and he planned to make Wonder of You come towards him in hopes that the traps would defeat him. But basically by nothing else rather than just sheer bad luck, when Rai launched that attack, it hit one of these bubbles and it ended up hurting Rai, and it even pierces through his head as he collapses to the ground. Rai starts to bleed out and he looks at Josuke and tells him to keep going and to not worry about him and to defeat Wonder of You, and that the calamity will stop with him. But he also tells Josuke that he doesn't think that he fully understands the true form of his soap bubbles, and that the bubbles that just hit Rai weren't just any trap, and he tells Josuke he can only say this once, so to listen close. These bubbles that Josuke just used, nobody was aware of them. Nobody can see them within stands, as he unravels his finger and begins to spin it like a rope. And he explains to Josuke that his soap bubbles are actually soft spinning lines, opening up his suit and revealing a gaping hole in his stomach, where Rai reveals the existence of the spin to Josuke, which, yes, we're talking about the same spin from part 7. Remember where we leave off in the hospital, because we're gonna go right back to the Higashikata household where we left off with Yasuho and Toru, because they're about to link back up again. Yasuho is still on the floor as Toru is overlooking the property, when all of a sudden Joshu comes out of the house picking up the LOCACACA branch, telling Yasuho that everything in the family has just went insane, and he starts blaming himself, saying that it's all his fault because he stood there and did nothing, where he starts hitting himself, when Yasuho tells him to stop and tells him that the enemy is coming and explains to him about the equivalent exchange of the fruit. Joshu says that he will protect Yasuho, saying that's why he came here, and even calls her his little strawberry. Anyways, they see that 2 of the fruits have already grown, but one of them's a little bit smaller, which Joshu says that if she eats the fruit that's bigger, it should heal Yasuho and her arm. As Toru looks over this and thinks to himself if he should stop this, but being curious on the equivalent exchange and if the fruit actually has power, he allows it to happen just to see if the fruit actually works. But also, if you think that Joshu was redeeming himself by being really creepy this entire part and also having a bad haircut, well, Joshu tells Yasuho that she should do an equivalent exchange with himself, telling her to do it with him, and that he is actually happy to join his body with her as he gets on top of her in a, well, let's just say a really weird position, calling her his little strawberry, asking her what shape they should be in, when they suddenly hear rustling in the trees behind them, which makes Yasuho realize that the stand user of Wonder of You must be nearby, and she pieces it together that this must be Toru since she had called him here, in which she takes the fruit, eating a big bite, causing her leg to fuse with Joshu, who's on top of her, healing her arm, which starts to regrow as Joshu's arm starts to shrink and disappear, performing an equivalent exchange. We then see a quick flashback that reveals that Toru had actually met Yasuho when she was a little girl. As she was out camping with her mother, mysteriously, Toru was there and told Yasuho he's looking for a person, someone who specifically is old, was licensed to practice medicine, is currently in a nursing home, and has basically no family that visits them, with Yasuho using her Paisley Park to search her phone, finding a match to a former doctor, that being of Satoru, with Toru thinking to himself that this looks like someone he can impersonate as he walks into the trees, and Yasuho is just left there confused. And then since they were later together and dating, this kind of shows that Toru has been present throughout her entire life. Joshu, having lost his arm, starts to freak out and he's yelling at Yasuho as Toru looks on, seeing the equivalent exchange's power is true, thinking about how he can sell these fruits for basically however much money he wants, since people will pay anything for this power, as he plans to go and now get the LOCACACA branch from them. Yasuho, having figured out that Toru is the stand user, starts yelling out towards the trees on the edge of the property for Toru to show himself, with him slowly appearing, as Yasuho questions how Toru seems to have been present basically throughout her whole life, as Toru tries to tell Yasuho to leave as he will spare her from the fate of calamity, but of course she refuses. Yasuho attempts to search her phone to locate someone that can go get Josuke, but Joshu suddenly reaches out towards Yasuho, yelling at her super angrily to give his arm back, in which of course Yasuho refuses, saying the arm is hers now and she needs to find Josuke and that Joshu needs to go grab the pot so they can get away. But Joshu just at this point goes absolutely insane and he's yelling at her, calling her a bunch of things that I can't say to keep my channel monetized, and he's just yelling at her with pure anger, with Yasuho having at this point in her phone located Nijimura's contact to call her for help to find Josuke, as Joshu starts to attack her. Mysteriously, as this happens, we get a quick narration to show that a plane was flying in the skies above Morio, and somehow the plane door becomes unattached from it, dropping from the sky towards the ground. Just keep this in mind, this will come important later. As Joshu attempts to attack Yasuho, he suddenly trips to the ground over the LOCACACA flower pot, as we see Wonder of You start to loom over them, but with Joshu being on the ground, this allows Yasuho to call Nijimura, who is actually already at the hospital treating her mother, Holly. Back to Josuke now. Josuke tries to bait Wonder of You towards him by destroying a cart of the LOCACACA 6251 vials, smashing each vial, as Wonder of You tells Josuke that Yasuho is at the Higashikata estate and that she is the next in the order of the flow of calamity and she's gonna die shortly, when as Josuke is smashing the vials, suddenly a glass shard shoots up, impaling his neck. Josuke tries to attack Wonder of You and tries to kick him with his bubbles, but the bubbles, instead of making contact with Wonder of You, go backwards, hurting Josuke as he falls back on the cart, impaling his shoulder. He attempts to launch a bubble attack when all of a sudden they feel a gust of wind, as born this way, Nijimura's stand comes in, with its wind being very cold and freezing wind that freezes the bubbles and blows them towards Wonder of You, with them actually making contact, breaking his cane and also hitting his head, as we see a shot of Toru also bleeding from his head, as we get narration that something was in Josuke's bubble that he wasn't aware of, and that these bubbles were ones that can't be seen. Having landed the first successful attack on Wonder of You and Toru, Josuke summons his stand and continues breaking the leftover vials of the LOCACACA 6251 on the ground, and he stands up as Wonder of You is shocked that he was actually hit, as Nijimura walks in with a phone saying that she came here to give this to Josuke. As we look up to see Nijimura and seeing that Wonder Review's broken cane is now lodged in her head through her eye as she collapses to the ground trying to pass the phone to Josuke, as we see Born This Way start to disintegrate as calamity has now struck Nijimura. And man, do I gotta say, I know that she was like a minor secondary character this part, but man, rest in peace to Nijimura. She was really clutch in this moment. Josuke picks up the phone connecting with Yasuho, with her Paisley Park appearing to help Josuke, as she tells Josuke about everything about Toru and says that if they can kill Toru, that the calamities will end. As suddenly, Wonder Review just starts to retreat from the fight and walk out of the room, as Toru at the same time appears from the tree line walking towards Yasuho. Toru says that he's calling off going against Josuke. What really matters is making sure he can get the new LOCACACA branch, as he reaches for the flower pot, as Yasuho on the phone yells out to Josuke to hurry up and get to the Higashikata property. As Josuke attempts to run out of the room and the hospital, Rai, who is barely alive at this point, reaches out grabbing his arm, telling him to listen, saying that if Wonder Review is leaving, that must mean it's because he knows that he's in danger fighting against Josuke because of the invisible bubbles he has with the spin, and he tells Josuke to use that to defeat him. Josuke, however, responds saying that even if they're invisible, he can't control them, with Rai saying that's because they don't exist in this world, because they can go beyond it, and they can go beyond the ability of Wonder Review. Yasuho tries to shield the branch as Toru says to give it to him so that the branch won't be destroyed in the incoming calamity that will befall her, when Joshu, who was knocked out on the ground, gets up yelling at Toru saying, who does he think he is talking to Yasuho like that, and anybody who talks to her like that is his enemy, as he tries to lunge at Toru with his little arm that's still regrowing, when suddenly they all look up towards the sky, noticing an object falling down towards them, with all three of them looking up trying to see what this is. Toru tells Yasuho to get away from the pot right now, as Joshu says to get his grimy hands off of her, and then suddenly a leaf falling to the ground pierces Joshu's finger, cutting it off and causing him to fall back on top of Yasuho, as Toru is now able to grab the flower pot, with Yasuho calling out to Josuke that Toru has taken the new LOCACACA branch, but also that something is falling from the sky towards her. Back in the hospital, Rai tells Josuke that his only option is to pursue after Wonder Review, as we see Wonder Review walking away, as Josuke shoots a bubble towards Wonder Review, with Wonder Review saying that it's no use, as we then also see a bubble start to come out of Josuke's star birthmark. Rai tells Josuke an explanation about his bubbles, saying that they are small spinning lines that don't exist in this world, and they can transcend the logic of the calamities. And they are also a fusion of Killer Queen's explosive ability and of Josefumi's soft and wet bubbles, meaning that they can produce an explosive spin. Josuke fires a bubble at Wonder Review, but he deflects it with the remaining part of his cane, as Josuke says he felt something come out of his shoulder. And as Wonder Review continues to walk away inside the elevator, he summons a second rock insect named Obladi Oblada, who I will just refer to as Obladi to make it easy, as Wonder Review says that this is part of his evacuation plan and that Josuke's last attack caused Obladi to be propelled towards him, as Josuke turns around his hand and sees that the new rock insect is stuck to him. Josuke attempts to pull it off of his hand, but this causes it to basically multiply, covering even more of his arm, and it essentially acts like a leech feeding off his blood to multiply itself. Wonder Review gets in the elevator attempting to leave and tries to close the door, but Paisley Park, through the phone, is able to go into the circuitry of the elevator, stopping the door, as Yasuho yells out for Josuke to fire one more shot, as we see a bubble start to come out from his star mark. Josuke fires a shot at Wonder Review, but Obladi deflects it, causing it to instead hit the wall, as Josuke is essentially taken over by the rock insect at this point and collapses to the ground. Yasuho, through the phone, yells out that the object in the sky is drawing closer, as we finally see that this is actually that airplane door we saw before, and it's about to hit her, when suddenly a bubble comes from her phone, shooting out in like a beam and hits Toru's arm, knocking him back and injuring him, at the same time that the airplane door that was falling from the sky suddenly changed directions and crashes into the Higashikata household, as Yasuho looks on, saying that she was spared from calamity. Josuke gets on the phone asking Yasuho if Toru is still there, since he sees one of you in the hospital now trying to retreat and is severely damaged. And he tells her that the bubble that came out from the phone was his invisible spin. But he asks again if Toru is still alive, where Yasuho looks at him and sees Toru on the ground bleeding, confirming that he's there, with Josuke saying that he's going to shoot another shot at him and tells her to point the phone towards him. Toru gets up and starts walking towards Yasuho, as we see that he took the fruit that was still growing on the branch and he ate it, as Yasuho realizes that he's coming towards her to try and do an equivalent exchange and heal his wounds by exchanging with Yasuho, as he reaches out and tries to touch her. He starts to approach closer when Joshu gets back up, trying to defend Yasuho by using his stand to punch him. But as he does that, some bolts detach from the gutter above him, which falls on his head, knocking him out, as Toru gets closer and Josuke keeps yelling through the phone for Yasuho to point the phone screen towards Toru, as another bubble starts to come out from his star birthmark. As Josuke is on the phone in the hospital, he's able to run and find a shower room, where he jumps in the water, washing the obladi off him. We then see another bubble shoot from Yasuho's phone, where we see Josuke say his new attack, "Soft and wet, go beyond." A bubble that doesn't exist anywhere in this world, as we see it shoot out of the phone and it hits Toru, sending him through the air into the Higashikata garage, where he slams against the wall, as Toru is bloodied and he tries to crawl inside the house by opening up a door, where he sees KAATO standing there crying. Being free from the rock insect and with one review now being severely damaged, we see Josuke start walking through the hospital to leave, and on his way he sees Holly in a hospital bed, as he also takes a look back to see both Rai and Nijimura dead on the ground, with Rai having succumbed to his injuries from the prior battle. Which, man, once again, rest in peace of both of them. These JoJo deaths always just are so sad. We see KAATO in the garage start crying uncontrollably, and she starts saying that she was living in an apartment nearby and she came over here to bring JOBIN a full pot of cream stew, which was actually his favorite food. But by the time that she arrived, JOBIN was already dead. Yasuho tells KAATO to not touch Toru, as he's reaching towards her trying to do an equivalent exchange with her to heal his injuries, and she also explains the power of the LOCACACA fruit to KAATO. Toru stands up, grabbing a garden blade that fell on the ground, and he starts to taunt KAATO about JOBIN, saying that he died without his desires coming true, when KAATO reveals her stand of space trucking, whose ability is that she can store things inside of a deck of cards that she can summon to attack, in which she throws a card at Toru, actually injuring him and pinning his arms and legs to the floor, as Yasuho looks up and sees Wonder of You standing on the roof, as she tells KAATO to get away from Toru. And we actually see KAATO say that she has no desire to attack Toru, and she was just trying to pin him down, which is why her attacks were actually able to connect with him. KAATO grabs another card, as Toru looks at this in horror and yells out asking what is between those cards, with her saying that this is her family's curse and he will now undertake all of it, when she pulls a card with TSURUGI falling out and touching Toru, causing them both to do an equivalent exchange. They both start to fuse together, as the Higashikata family all look on, seeing the equivalent exchange taking place, as KAATO crushes the LOCACACA branch that's on the ground with her card and uses her cards to store some of the sap and drips it into TSURUGI's mouth to help speed up the exchange process, as Toru yells out, with his body crumbling into pieces, saying he never thought that they would pull an attack like this on him, as we see one of you coming towards KAATO trying to grab onto her, but before it can do anything, it starts to disintegrate. Toru starts begging and pleading for KAATO and Yasuho to stop this, but before he can stop the exchange, we see him start to break into pieces, as TSURUGI falls down, now being fully healed from the rock disease, as Toru's rock body starts to fully disintegrate into pieces. However, since KAATO had crushed the LOCACACA branch, that actually counted as an attack against Toru, as she looks down and she sees the garden blade has been lodged in her side, as she falls to the ground, as HATO, Daya, and Joshu all yell out for their mom, where she is gone at this point. We see Yasuho looking over all of this and seeing Toru now finally defeated, and she stands there and she thinks to herself that Jojolion is a story about breaking a curse. There are things that exist in this world that the eyes cannot see. In Jojolion, that is the shape of a person's heart. And that the prices that the Higashikata family had to pay and the sacrifice they had to make were far too large and cruel. And that could be seen in the form of JOBIN collapsed in the passageway between the house and the garage, and in the form of the crying family members. Also in the form of Hato, who hadn't seen her mother since she was a little girl and she never got a chance to forgive her. In the form of Joshu, who acted out of selfish desire and he ended up getting injured. And also in the form of Mitsuba, who lost her husband. This may look like despair, but to Yasuho, this looked like hope, as they all acted in the name of hope, and that the hope of the family was visible in the smooth skin of TSURUGI, showing that the family's curse was finally broken. However, the story isn't completely over yet. We see the family drag the body bag that had NORIUSKE in it into the garage and open it up as an ambulance arrives. As they look and they see that the burn marks that JOBIN left look to be very minor, showing that JOBIN was holding back and purposefully didn't kill NORIUSKE. Yasuho looks at the passed out NORIUSKE in the bag, where she sees the hand of Wonder of You over his shoulder, opening up the bag to get a better look when it disappears, thinking about how it can't be there because Toru is literally turned into dust, as NORIUSKE suddenly starts to yell out in pain as we see Wonder of You's hand appear in his mouth, having entered into his body. Basically, they realize that with the natural law of calamity, even without a stand user, calamity will always continue. So Toru wasn't actually using the power of calamity. Calamity is a natural law of the world. He was basically just manipulating it to his advantage rather than creating it. Fortunately though, Josuke has arrived at the house and he uses his soft and wet go beyond to launch a bubble that goes through NORIUSKE, dragging the calamity power of Wonder of You out of him, successfully defeating it. And then we see both him and Yasuho reunite together as Yasuho places her head onto him, hugging his chest. And that is the end of Jojolion. But wait a second, I'm just kidding. One more small thing that happens right after this for the last 2 chapters. We see the Radio Gaga incident, where we get a flashback to the year 1941. We see an elderly and widowed Lucy Steele arrive in Morio to investigate this place, where she meets a strange guy named Fumi, asking him for help in finding a place that she's looking for, showing him a picture, where this guy says that the place in the photo is the orchard of the Radio Gaga incident. Lucy tells him that she works for the Speedwagon Foundation here to investigate this land, where Fumi says that many people have died in that area, such as a couple who was right around the curve in the orchard making out, when all of a sudden the woman said that she could hear a voice of something calling out to her. And as she started to walk and hobble away, when she got close to the guardrail, she suddenly started saying Gaga Gaga, and then she took off her clothes. At the same time, a farm truck was passing by, and out of nowhere, she disappeared. Both her boyfriend and the farmer had no idea what happened. She just vanished, leaving only behind a small piece of her foot, as she still hasn't been found to this day. But Fumi accepts the request to help out Lucy as they call a chauffeur to drive them to this ground where the incident happened. And as they're there, the driver starts to act strange, walking towards the guardrail, saying he hears something calling him, saying Gaga Gaga, and he takes off his clothes as Lucy attempts to call out to him, when once again, a farm truck passes as they look back and the man has disappeared. Seeing that the legend is true, Fumi tells Lucy that they need to leave, but she refuses, saying that when she was 14 years old, she encountered a place called the Devil's Palm, which was a land that brought out special powers in people, but she came to this land in Morio as it seemed to be similar to the Devil's Palm, and also that she found a special fruit called the LOCACACA that she thinks is growing in this land. Fumi keeps urging her that they need to leave, when suddenly Lucy hears voices from the guardrail, ushering her to come closer, and as she gets closer to it, her clothes start to suddenly come off as she sees eyes in the bolts and body parts in between the steel plates of the guardrail, where she starts to get sucked into the guardrail, with Fumi narrowly saving her by pulling her away, as we see an arm extending from the guardrail with mangled body parts. They attempt to get into the car to leave when the driver from before, with only half a body, comes back trying to drag Lucy back in as Radio Gaga sent it after them. As the driver tries to pull Lucy back, Fumi intervenes again and he finds himself being dragged towards the Radio Gaga instead. But as Fumi's clothes get ripped, Lucy sees that he has the star birthmark, seeing that he's linked to Johnny Joestar, and she realizes that that must mean that he has a stand power. So she allows him to get sucked into the Radio Gaga, which awakens his stand. As Fumi makes vines appear on his arm and he uses that to start the car's engine and have it come towards them, hitting the guardrail, successfully defeating the Radio Gaga. As Fumi flees the scene with Lucy on his back and he reveals his full name to her, that being of Joseph Joestar, a descendant of Johnny Joestar. And also, as they run, Lucy looks over and she sees Toru in an orchard picking the LOCACACA branch, trying to get Joseph to stop, but he continues running. We then get a narration as we start to close out this story, and it kind of tells about what everything happens. That Lucy Steele lived until she died in America 3 years later after this happened due to a lung disease, and that Joseph Joestar had actually accompanied Lucy to New York, but with the world changing as America entered into World War II, he wasn't able to return back to Japan until the war ended. So Joseph was able to work as Lucy's assistant and actually receive citizenship in New York, where he ended up meeting a woman in the Speedwagon Foundation named Susie Q, where they had a daughter named Holly Joestar Kira. We also see that the Higashikata fruit parlor was taken over by the 4th generation NORIUSKE in 1993, and it gained strength by importing fruit from overseas. And then in 2010, they rebuilt their former main building with modern architectural design with the help of an architect named YOTSUYA. Now, ending this out, we go back to the present time, with Josuke and Yasuho having just left visiting the hospital where they were meeting with Holly. However, the LOCACACA is completely gone, so they're actually unable to cure Holly and she's still in the hospital. As they're in the parking lot, however, they recognize a woman, with Josuke instantly recognizing her as Kiyomi Kujo, who is Josefumi Kujo's mother, which is actually technically Josuke's mother as well. And throughout this entire part, Josuke has struggled with his identity of who he actually is, and he thinks to himself about how his first memories began when he emerged from the walleyes, and that he is not Josefumi, and he is not Kira. He is Josuke, the man who came from soil. Yasuho uses her Paisley Park on Kiyomi's phone, seeing that she had several photos of Josefumi in it, saying it looks like that she's been looking for him this whole time. And Josuke is at this point his own person, and he decides not to speak with her and not to confront her as Josefumi. He is instead himself as Josuke, as both him and Yasuho head to the Higashikata fruit parlor. We see the Higashikata family all speaking about what cake they should choose for tomorrow to properly celebrate NORIUSKE finally being discharged from the hospital, as they're all just overcome with emotion. So they tell Josuke to choose the cake, showing that he is now part of the family, as Yasuho walks out of the parlor with tears of joy. And that is the true end of Jojolion. And man, what a part this was. It was like a roller coaster. It had its ups, it had its downs, and it completely changed at the end with the reveal of Toru. And I know that this was a long video. It's the longest video I've ever put out, but if anybody has made it to the end, thank you, thank you, thank you. I cannot thank you enough. I truly hope that you enjoyed this recap of Jojolion, and I hope you stick with my channel to see more. I'm very curious to see what you guys think about this part. So if you have any thoughts about this, please leave a comment down below so that we can kind of just take this in and just all experience this together. But I hope to see you guys in the next video.